Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So, with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. For today's letter, we are going to be reading about Mandy's experience with Ralph. Now, just as a heads up before we get into this letter, this one is on the longer side. So, for those of you who understandably may prefer the shorter letters, I'm just letting you know ahead of time that this one, may feel like a feature-length film, hopefully with good quality and also good insight. But I'm just letting you know ahead of time because I know that length can often be at times a bit off-putting for some people who see this. So just letting you know that this is the nature of this. And to accompany me through Mandy's experience, I'm joined by Amy. Amy, would you like to reintroduce yourself for everyone?
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm so happy to be back reading a letter with Ken and all of you. And as you probably know, I'm an attachment coach, and I work with Ken. You can find me on his website and on Instagram at Here Comes Healing. And we're just so happy to be back chatting with you all.
Yes, and also I just want to say a big thank you to all the listeners who've shared that they have been following the podcast. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who do listen to the podcast, but there is a lot on this podcast in terms of volume. Not that I am ashamed of that. I think it's fantastic that we've got so much rich material to work with. But when someone shared to me today, it was yesterday, someone shared with me that they'd listened to 5,500 minutes of this podcast. I was shocked because I mean, even though Amy and I have participated in these letter readings and we're extremely grateful for them, particularly from an educational point of view, that's a significant investment amount of time as well too. So I want to share and say thank you for investing so much time and energy into this because it has been both educational and a passion project.
Yes, I echo what you said, Ken. It's so amazing when we read the comments, under the videos and to hear that somebody spent that much time listening. I always hear from people who say, I just put you guys on when I'm in the car on the way home, and it just feels like I'm having a conversation about a really uncomfortable thing with two friends, and that just gives me the warm fuzzies. I love it so much, and I'm so appreciative.
So with that being said, let's get into Mandy's letter. Now, Mandy gave us an intro for this, calling this letter. He said I gave him the ick after telling me I was healing him. And could I just say, like, I love this title so much. I'm sure you would probably too, Amy, because I feel like it already says so much without saying very much at all. Like, it says volumes. And I think we can predictably know where this is going.
Yes, as you'll see, and I think you'll agree, we have such beautiful writers. When we receive these letters, they're just written so beautifully. And throughout, the title is amazing. And then she also uses little emojis that Ken, I hope you share when you're reading the letter because they're really on point and they're really perfect.
Oh, there are emojis too. So, as usual, I haven't read this letter. Unlike the last one we read where it was the reverse, there are indeed emojis. I will be sure to point them out when they happen. I can actually, oh wow. I just skimmed through and I can see them. Okay, let's get into it. Mandy writes, Dear Ken, thanks in advance for your insight on this confusing discard and the aftermath. It really scrambled my brain and almost led to a mental breakdown. I feel you there. A friend introduced me to your podcast, and I can honestly say that it helped me climb out of a hole and start to make sense of what happened. I can't thank you enough for the work you do. This is the story of myself and an old ex who reconnected after 20 years. Wow. The whole experience has really made me take a look in the mirror and see the parts of myself that aren't fully healed. Mandy, you've already got my attention in more ways than one. Let's get into it. For the sake of this submission, I've renamed my ex Ralph. It's a fitting name, actually, because his real name isn't the one he uses either. Oh, the name he presents to the world is a nickname he gave himself at 13. Only his family, old coast friends, and I know his actual christened name. I always flitted between calling him by his real name and his nickname. A bit about the background. I grew up in a loving but emotionally unpredictable home. My mum struggled with depression, and as a kid, I always felt responsible for making her happy. She died of breast cancer when I was 15 and everything changed. I want to take a moment here to say I am sorry to hear that you had that, Mandy, because that is terrible to go through. I think having the sudden loss of a parent, especially due to cancer, which can feel so unfair, so cruel, and seemingly so hopeless, particularly when it is a parent, particularly a mum, devastating on a child. So I'm really sorry you've had that experience. Sorry, you had that experience, singular. My dad quickly, well, experiences actually, because of the emotionally unpredictable home. My dad quickly started dating. Ooh, God, I could imagine that wouldn't have felt great to have had that happening so quickly. Remarried within a year, and his new wife gradually forced my siblings and me out of, oh God, out of the home. That's terrible. Let me read that again. My dad quickly started dating, remarried within a year, and his new wife gradually forced my siblings and me out of the home. Fucking awful experience to go through. When she lashed out at me physically during an argument, my dad blamed me and ordered me to leave. No, that's not okay. I was 18 and was just finishing school. He then cut us all off and built a new life with his new wife and her kids. We've since reconnected after his predictable divorce, but he still takes wow, but he still takes no accountability and interactions with him remain difficult. I normally would read the full page, but we got to stop here. That paragraph alone has so much going on.
Yeah, there's so much here, Mandy, and I just want to offer, so much validation and empathy for everything that you've been through. Again, like Ken said, to lose your mom to cancer when you're this age, no less, is so traumatic and so hard. But then for your dad to quickly start dating again, get remarried, and essentially have a new family and push you guys out when you were just 18. 18 is a baby. I don't care if legally 18-year-olds are adults. We're babies when we're 18. We're practically babies when we're 25. Um, this is so heartbreaking. And, the fact that you've reconnected with him really shows your depth of love and your um, grace and empathy, and the fact that it seems like you've been able to put really deep hurts aside for the sake of having some sort of relationship with him, even though he takes no accountability for his actions. Um, I'm just so sorry that betrayal from a parent like that after losing your other parent, it's just devastating. And I'm just so sorry. And I hope that you've had support, throughout life, just to unpack these things because this is just plainly difficult for anybody to ever experience anything like this.
I completely agree. And I want to add a few extra things too. This isn't to pathologize, this isn't to claim certainty, but it's just to say there are some shades of attachment things already within this paragraph that I could imagine reenact potentially with your relationship with Ralph. For instance, having a dad move quickly after your mum died of cancer is already landing in the realm of emotional immaturity. It's already landing in the realm of he couldn't cope with the grief. So what did he do? Started a new life. And the fact that he couldn't also engage with you, and also it almost feels a little bit too easy for him to have colluded with the new wife. It almost feels like memories and connections of anything old that related to his old life, his wife who died, was, really deeply painful for him. It still seems like that connection he wants to have with you is there. Like, I don't think he would have reconnected with you at all if, after the divorce, but it seems to me like he's severely emotionally unavailable, limited in his capacity to sit with you. It seems like the ex-wife, sorry, the ex-wife. Well, I suppose it is the ex-wife now, but the new woman he would get with, sounds dreadful on so many levels. And it sounds to me like she's got some huge issues, but I don't know, like there's not enough information here for me to make anything conclusive about her. But already there's exiling you from the family. There's, there's no time to process any of the grief that's actually happened to you. You're going straight into survival mode. So this is the land of like, if we're looking at this from like an adverse childhood experience score, an ACE score, already we're getting some capital T's going on here for you. And I'm already thinking he himself has some, like I said, highly, highly emotionally mature behavior going on that can be consistent with avoidant behavior on the severe end. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Yes, to everything you said. And, you know, and forgive me, listeners, if this feels like I'm making grand sweeping statements, but I think a lot of people can agree that in general, men need therapy. A lot of men need to go to therapy so that they can be healthier fathers and partners and not inflict such lifelong pain on their children. And there is a very tender, special dynamic between a father and a daughter and a father and a son. But, we're talking about Mandy right now. To, for a daughter to feel like she is being pushed aside and sh literally, metaphorically and physically shut out and cut off for a new wife and then new kids is devastating. I don't care who you are, there's not a human on earth who can experience that and not come out with some trauma or some attachment wounds. And it's a real shame that so many people are out here being parents and like leading families with this not the slightest bit of emotional intelligence or emotional maturity or empathy. It's really irresponsible the way he behaved. And, now I know I'm crossing into this territory of passing judgment and forgive me, but it's just really devastating. And I'm just so sorry that you went through all of that.
Agreed. Last thing I'll say on this before we continue is I think you have a point with regards to men going to therapy. Part of me wanted to jump in and be like, but women also need to go therapy too. But I thought, no, I mean, that's not really the point. Statistically, we know that, men do not see therapy as a resource that could assist them. Often it's seen as weakness. And I think that whilst this experience that Mandy has gone through, her dad's behavior, is broadly speaking to many systemic and also trauma-based factors. I do think that it would be wonderful if therapy was normalized, grief and healing was normalized, particularly for men, rather than seeing it as an internal failure that they can't sit with their grief and they need to find coping mechanisms to regulate. I think that generally speaking, we will see statistically more men, I don't want to say fail, but have a harder time of grasping the relevance of needing to sit with their stuff. So that I think is pertinent information to share. Um,
Yeah. And
I was
I
gonna say,
just want to
Amy,
say
you go.
one. Yeah, I just want to say one thing to try to save myself from from the men who are listening and who are mad at me for saying that. Here's the thing, to your point, Ken, I'm not even necessarily blaming men. It's the patriarchy.
Yeah,
It's
agreed.
masculinity which teaches men that crying is weak, therapy is weak, emotions are bad, and that toxicity and shame about emotions builds up in men and results in them not being able to deal with their own emotions and in turn not being able to hold the emotions of their partners and of their children and then thus just perpetuating this generational trauma. And so I love men. I don't hate men. This isn't a man-hating podcast, but I think it is a lot of the patriarchy and toxic masculinity.
Agreed. Agreed. I don't think we can look at trauma without also looking at the systemic stuff that's also a byproduct and also works with it as well too. And the patriarchy is a huge part of that as well. But anyways, let's resume focusing on Mandy and also commencing her interactions with Ralph because there's a lot here and I'm keen to get into it. So Ralph and I first started dating from 19 to 21 years old after meeting on a volunteer teaching English program in China. We continued our relationship long distance through university once both back in the UK. Our relationship was full of laughter and we had an easy friendship, but he had a chronic weed habit and could be unreliable. I was carrying a lot of unprocessed sadness from my past and didn't know how to communicate it. Well, especially if you're just 19, that's what, probably not even a year after you've been exiled from your family. Yeah, you would have huge, I mean, I'm sure there may be more to it than just the exiling itself, and also the passing of your mother. But I could imagine there'd be massive amounts of grief that you've been holding on to off the back of what you've been through. Um, his friends used to say he was madly in love with me, but we rarely said it ourselves. I ended the relationship after 2.5 years because I didn't feel emotionally supported, and to my surprise, he took it really badly. When I eventually started dating someone new, he cut contact entirely, and I missed him for a long time. I want to take a pause here just strategically because, again, in one paragraph alone, there's a lot of material here that's worth, I think, talking about, and then we can continue because I can see that the next paragraph goes to talk about the reconnection, but I think it's good to just take a moment to talk about the context of where you and Ralph initially met. It sounds to me like there's already some signs that Ralph himself has some stuff. I mean, his weed use is already suggestive of some things that are going on. Meeting for a volunteer teaching English program, I think that would have probably been a combination of wanting to explore, wanting to pursue passion. And I will say this for myself, sometimes those global opportunities also can be a form of escapism to just sort of decompress after a really traumatic experience of childhood as well too. So to me, it seems like both of you probably had your own respective sadness that was going on as well too. And it's interesting how his friends express that he's madly in love with you. To me, that suggests that they are attuned to what's going on with him and could recognize that there's stuff there. But the fact that you didn't feel emotionally supported and you chose to end it for that reason says volumes. Because to me, it says even if the love was there, the presence wasn't. So that's just what I wanted to say on that. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Ken. And it's a really cool, I do just, I love reading stories. And believe it or not, and Ken, I'm curious if you feel this way too. It's not so uncommon to hear stories where people have reconnected after decades.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really something to say about the foundation of, in fact, I think the last letter you and I read together might have been the same foundation, perhaps. Anyway,
Yeah, it was.
it's, yeah, it sets a different tone. You're getting off to a different start when you have the benefit of knowing someone way back when, but it can also provide sort of a false sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it can also provide a false sense of value in that you can feel like like, well, I really need to fight hard for this dynamic to last because we've known each other for so long. Um, yeah, it's an interesting start. I also will say, reading the way you both are interacting with each other, and I'm curious to hear what the listeners think as far as attachment styles go. But the attachment stuff in this letter, I think, is a little, it's pretty nuanced and pretty tricky. Nothing is screaming out to me, I think, until later, an attachment style. So, what do you think, Ken?
I've got a flavor. I've got a flavor of FA-ness coming in, not only from Ralph, but also potentially from Mandy herself, only because, you know, there is that reluctance to speak about emotional matters, or maybe not reluctance, I should say, withholding of emotional matters. And also, I don't think a merely anxiously attached person, I'm not saying it can't happen, would have come out with that background. Like, I mean, hearing about that background, I'm like, there's a lot of betrayal and trauma there that's usually characterized in a person who has a fearful avoidant attachment. Now, this is not diagnostic. This is speculative. I could be wrong. Maddie could come back and be like, you're absolutely, crazy. Get back on your meds. This is totally bullshit. But I am sensing it's just got that, and I think you might agree with me, Amy, or you could say, no, Ken, definitely get back on your meds. To me, there is, I think, that element of there's betrayal themes, there's already from like the backstory, there's an element of needing to be rushed into survival mode at a very young age that is sometimes not always consistent with those that merely have an avoidant or anxiously attached system. So
Mhm.
there is a lot of intensity to this that I wouldn't normally see in either of those presentations.
Yeah, completely. I agree.
But
Hmm.
but you're not confirming, so it suggests that there's more to see.
We shall see as we journey through the letter together.
Indeed. All right, Mandy continues. About 10 years later, he resurfaced on Facebook, now a high-earning banker and no longer a stoner. Hmm. I'm just commenting on that because in my head I'm going, great. So we've moved on from weed to banking. So there's the coping mechanism. I was in a strained relationship with an anxiously attached partner who had cheated on me, and he was a year into dating a woman who was stunning, but he said mismatched in values. We met for occasional drinks and fell into our old rhythm of laughter and deep conversation. Once, Ralph asked me wistfully, why did we ever break up? But when I eventually became single, he disappeared again. I assume because it blurred boundaries with his girlfriend. Oh, so hold up a second. Both of you are in interesting relationships with other people and then also connecting. Oh, well, this takes on an interesting twist. So, yeah, how interesting. And like you were saying before, Amy, very common for people to have that, isn't it? Like an old flame from the past resurfaces, and then, you're not necessarily, it's not that you're not enjoying the current relationship as such, it's more like it's probably like your existing relationship might be on the way out, and, you know, an old flame emerges, and it sort of feels like, it feels like there's a opportunity perhaps to see if there's new life beyond what you're currently experiencing right now. I was trying to carefully articulate this because I wasn't trying to come from a place of you both were looking for new supply. You were both trying to cheat on an existing partner. No. This situation happens more times than people care to think, and often it's not malicious. It's just one of those things where life just deals you with some strange cards and goes, "Oh, by the way, an ex-flame is coming back into your life, and now you got to kind of try and navigate it with the complexities of your existing life."
Yeah, no, yeah. And also, I think, you know, I do think that in general, dismissive, avoidantly attached people are the most likely attachment style to dip back into their previous partner pool of decades past or, even 20 years. And I think that's because there's a level of comfort there, right? You already know that this person has not rejected you once in the past, so maybe they won't reject you again. Um, they already accept you to some degree. There's some familiarity there. And, funnily enough, we really do see a lot of situations where the person who has returned is dismissive avoidant and they've returned after all of these years. Now, I'm not giving anything away here and I'm not, saying anything, although there are only three insecure attachment styles. So, it's going to be one of these. But yeah, it's very interesting.
It's absolutely going to be secure.
Okay, I'll tell you right now, it's not.
Damn.
I don't think it is.
Damn. I thought we were going to get a twist, but no. Um,
No, it's very this is one of those, not to give anything away, but I do think that this is one of those letters that really beautifully demonstrates all of the layers and nuances that we really do have to take into account when we're thinking about any one person's story. Sometimes things are much more clear cut and sometimes um, there's just a lot there, and I think this is one of those.
Makes sense. Well, to me, I will say before we continue, I do think that Ralph ducking out, it had nothing to do necessarily with his girlfriend. I mean, I think you becoming single meant, to me, if we're looking at this from a, I mean, look, my speculation is, I won't say what I think it is, but I'll just say, I don't think it's that. To me, I'm like, no, that doesn't feel right based on this. Like, to me, a clearer conversation would have been had for ducking out the way that he did. Like, for him to re-emerge and then to duck out that abruptly, no, something doesn't feel quite right about that. Anyways, Mandy writes, I then spent the next decade dating emotionally unavailable men until I took 2 years off to work on my patterns. Good on you. By the time I felt ready to date again, I could spot avoidance instantly, but I wasn't meeting anyone I actually fancied. So when Ralph messaged out of the blue in December 2024 asking if I fancied meeting up, I said yes. Oh, wow. So just at the end of last year. Okay, gosh, this is recent. Within half an hour of meeting, he told me he and his girlfriend of 12 years had broken up at the start of the year. So was this the same girlfriend that he was with before? Probably. He was living he was now living in Spain, running a multi-million pound luxury travel company and traveling constantly. My God. Give me a slice of that. His ex still worked. Oh God, his ex still worked for him, but he insisted things were amicable and that the breakup had been the best thing that ever happened to him. He said their relationship had been dying for years with barely any intimacy for the last two. I'm going to quickly reassert my previous statement, which is he did not duck out because he was respecting his girlfriend. He might have said that in his head, but I do not believe that him disappearing after he became single had anything to do with his girlfriend. That's just a hunch there. But I mean, Amy, what are your thoughts?
I concur.
Yeah, also, what are you thinking about his multi-million pound luxury travel company? Not in terms of how glamorous it sounds, but more in terms of, you know, some some stuff that's emerging.
I will say if he has a multi-million pound luxury traveling company and he's traveling constantly, it's sort of a dismissive avoidance dream.
I would have to
He
agree.
is, right? He can go anywhere he wants, whenever he wants. And that's not just a dismissive avoidant, that can also be fearful avoidant. Um, or a secure person who just really enjoys traveling. Obviously, it's probably not that. But it does, you mentioned something earlier about having replaced maybe potentially a weed fixation with traveling or with something else that can take up all of his time and sort of be experienced in a more obsessive way. And that to me sounds like this might be a part of this traveling.
I also want to add too, because I read a letter out earlier in the year where someone had done the exact same thing with the I nearly said ex-wife, ex-girlfriend in the picture. Bad boundaries, bad boundaries. And that is a very typical strategy we see of people who are dismissive avoidance, where it's like, bruh, like you need to have separation and space. Like, him saying things were amicable and yet the breakup had been the best thing that had ever happened. No, like you need a clean split. Like that's not healthy for either one of you. He invited me back to his hotel suite and we stayed up talking all night. He apologized for how he treated me when we were younger, saying I'm assuming this is, wait, I'm going to say this out loud and I'll see if it makes sense. Saying he wasn't unable to express his emotions properly back then. I think that's meant to say saying he was unable to express his emotions properly back then. He kissed me saying, I've missed you for 20 years. I can't believe this is happening. He explained he disappeared a decade earlier because once I was single, he felt he was, playing with fire and didn't want to hurt his girlfriend. Yeah, I don't believe the second part. We didn't sleep together, just held each other all night. In the morning, when things became intimate, I told him about a traumatic past assault with someone I was dating. Okay, quick trigger warning. I didn't read this part ahead of time, so I'm sorry. Trigger warning because it appears there's obviously SA related material, sexual assault material. So if anyone wants to duck out now because of this, it's totally understandable. So I'm just framing this ahead of time. For those of us still happy to continue, let's keep going. There's also mention too of STIs, sexually transmitted infections. So please bear in mind too that I'm just saying this for those of you that again may find this subject matter quite sensitive. So with that being said, let's continue. Um, I was left with HSV2. He was gentle and understanding and then opened up about a traumatic event that happened to him when he was 15, that he never told anyone and that left him drowning in shame. I felt so sad for him and thanked him for being so open with me. He said after we broke up, he spiraled and started having panic attacks because I was the only person he trusted. He said he basically became a quote unquote fuckboy, his words, for 7 years, but needed alcohol to numb his anxiety during sex. He said I had changed his life, that quitting weed and working hard had started after our breakup. He said he'd spent 20 years thinking about me almost constantly. Woo! Okay, there's a lot there. I need to take a breath. Amy, what are your thoughts on this?
Whew, it's a lot. There's a very intense bond being created within this time frame where they're sharing these respective traumas they've both experienced. And then he's sort of capping that off with saying that he's thought about her for 20 years and she had changed his life. Um, and here's the thing, I don't not believe him. I believe that he spent 20 years thinking about her. I believe that she changed his life. I believe that quitting weed and working hard started after the breakup between them because he no longer had her as that numbing agent to help him numb. And, first, and I should have started with this, I'm so sorry that both of you experienced traumatic events. Um, you know, it's it's awful. These sort of events mark us in ways that can shape everything and really change our lives. And I'm really sorry that both of you experienced things like this. Um, and again, when you have two people that are confiding in each other about this, it adds another about these sorts of things. It adds another layer of complexity and strength to the emotional bond because now you feel that you have shared this secret or shared this thing that has been paining you for so long with someone, and it makes you feel more emotionally dependent on them. And I'm not saying that that's a problem, like that makes sense, right? If we're wired for connection and we receive this soothing from someone because we were finally able to show this part of ourselves that has been hidden for so long and causing so much pain, it's a really intense thing.
Completely agree with everything you said. I want to add something else. I understand wanting to lift the lid on past stuff to get it off your chest and to be like, look, I want to share this thing that happened XYZ back, many, many, many years ago. I mean, it's the sort of stuff that romance novels are built on too, is the sharing of personal details that we've been waiting to finally get with our favorite characters when they share these intimate moments. There's a reason as to why we think hope to have an element of, I don't want to call it closure, but, you know, sharing of, very personal information about how deeply we've been moved by someone. But there's a hidden cost to this that we don't think about, which is, as Amy was alluding to, actually, you weren't alluding, you were being direct about it. This amount, this much in a hotel suite where you're, getting things like, I have been obsessing about you for 20 years. Here's this extremely traumatic thing that made me unable to communicate with you. I've also gone through something deeply traumatic and I've been going through some really difficult times and I would like, there to be some gentleness in this experience. There is a lot of high level, material being exchanged, which is not to say it should never be exchanged, but it's happening so quickly all at once. And whilst this can feel, particularly as a reader, I'm like, oh my God, this is, I'm feeling it. I'm like, there's a lot of material that's coming on here. And even my brain's like, I need like a minute to process even just one of those things because it's not to say that, like I said, this is not about shaming anyone for sharing any of this stuff. But for a brain to process this and what it does to the body is it can really add such a huge layer of romantic buildup and connectivity without letting time for the systems to settle and to actually take a minute to breathe. It's almost like you're being love bombed through revelation. And I don't think any of this is done with intentionality. It's more just that because this is such intense, material landing one right after another. This is a cocktail for bonding people very quickly. And it would also make what I presume to be the future betrayal. Well, I mean, we had it in the title. He said to you quite clearly from the sounds of it, Ralph, that you healing, he was healing through you, but then he got the ick from you. So I mean, like, to me, I can already see the betrayal happening ahead of time, but I think it's made worse by the fact that he's basically said, you are so significant to my life. I dream about you. I've obsessed about you. You've healed my weed addiction. I'm a changed man off the back of this, but I got the ick out of you. I mean, we're already setting up the scene for a massive train wreck.
Yeah, it's it sharing this paragraph could be the foundation for a beautiful relationship, but we already know that something goes wrong. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here reading it. And so, you know, um, it's good to share. It's good to be vulnerable, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, and it also makes sense that feeling betrayed by someone romantically at some point after you have shared things with them can really just make the cut feel so much deeper. I mean, and yeah, I'll save the rest of my commentary for later because I don't want to get too ahead.
You obviously know a lot. So, like, I know you do, but like, I mean,
I think I'm appearing, I think I'm appearing more cheeky and mysterious than I mean to be because um yeah, I don't want to get ahead of the letter, basically.
you're withholding Game of Thrones spoilers here. That's what I'm saying.
No, I promise it's not that. It's not.
All right, so let's
Mhm.
continue. I left that morning feeling half dreamy, half stunned. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I have been through not as intense experiences as this, but similarly, where when you're getting that, and particularly if you've had abandonment wounds, particularly if you're sensitive due to your attachment system, this is going to hit you like a freight train because not in a bad, well, not in like it's an adverse thing, so to speak, but it's dysregulating because that amount of euphoria, that amount of, oh my God, this is amazing, is going to hit in so many ways where frankly, and I've felt this too in the past when this has happened, you can feel lovesick. You can feel like you're into like a massive stage of limerence. And it doesn't mean that what you have isn't real. It just means you're not grounded. Your body is still calibrating all of this information and going, holy shit, what does this mean? And the likely conclusion is soulmate. Like this is, someone who I've been meaning to see my entire life. And there's definitely can be a soulmate component to this. I'm not taking that out of the equation, but I think it's very hard to stay grounded and connected when all this is happening. And it really shows that both of you obviously have something beautiful between each other. And there's a lot of intensity here too, probably coming from understandable wounding that you both experienced respectively. Anyways, after years of searching for someone who cared, here was a man saying he cared for me for about 2 decades. See, I really finally felt like I mattered to someone. Clown emoji. Like I just wanted to really emphasize that. I didn't say like that's coming from Mandy. Mandy put that there. I thought this was a really interesting use of the clown emoji because on one hand, you're exactly right, but I could understand that clown emoji's intentionality here because it would make you feel like, oh fuck, I've learned about avoidance, but little did I know there was one right in front of me this entire time.
Yeah, I chuckled when I saw the clown emoji, and then I also wanted to give you a hug, Mandy, because, and also again, like this is one of those things where um even though people can end up hurting us and the relationship can end badly, that doesn't always mean that they didn't care for you. And it, again, most certainly doesn't mean that like you should get back to them, right? There's so much nuance. There are a lot of people out here who are capable of connection and of love, but they are severely incapable of nurturing and sustaining that connection and love in a healthy way. And so I don't think you are a clown at all.
No, though he might be.
Yes.
He flew back to Spain the next day, and from then on, we spoke every day for 6 months. He was warm, consistent, and full of admiration. Nothing like the stoner I dated years ago. Ooh, can I take a moment just to say, we know that he's using a fake name for himself. I feel like this is a man who changes identities like clothes. And I think this is likely a result of his trauma, and I am not saying he has dissociative identity disorder, but when we think of change, it's usually an internal job. It's usually something that comes from within us to be like, I really don't like myself right now, and I need to do something to fix this. Now, for him to attribute so much change to you, I'm not taking that away from your influence. You have a lot of power and, you know, connectivity to this man, and I think you have influenced him for the better. And I get the sense that he's almost changed a little too easily, like as if to say he went from one avenue of life to a complete other. And it feels like a whole identity shift to me, not a, and this is a key word, it's not an integrated change. That's the kind of flavor that I'm getting. So it sort of feels like the outer appearance and some of the behavior may have changed, but I think some of the internal wounding and also the internal architecture hasn't been amended just yet, but we'll continue. While dealing with his mum's emotional volatility over Christmas, he sent long messages saying, I made him feel calmer and grounded. Over New Year, while climbing Kilimanjaro with barely any signal, he still checked in daily. It felt surreal. In early January, he flew to London and booked us into a luxury hotel. He seemed nervous the moment he saw me, but affectionate. We talked about China, our old relationship, and his family. He described a childhood full of emotional neglect from his mother, which I'd had no idea, and how his trauma at 15 had driven him to sofa hop at friends' houses to escape, and he medicated himself with weed. His parents had no idea what had happened. He said he was a giant ball of anxiety back then and that he'd always seen me as the stronger one. We spoke about neurodiversity because we both feel we might be further along the spectrum than most people. And he said he thinks he has ADHD. He commented on how much he liked the depth of our conversations, saying it was really lacking from his relationship with his ex. He said how that relationship had become codependent. Yeah, absolutely. She'd been financially dependent on him for a decade, yet resented him for giving her a job and withheld sex for the last 2 years. So why the hell would you want to keep her employed in your business? I know why he's done that from an irrational perspective, but from a logical perspective, it's like, bro, you haven't really gone out of the codependency with her. When we slept together that weekend, I could tell he hadn't been intimate in a long time. He posted stories that hinted at being with me, and while they didn't show me fully, I was happy to not be completely hidden, which I've experienced with other men. But at our final breakfast, he suddenly said he hoped his ex hadn't seen the stories because, quote unquote, she'd be mad he didn't meet with her. Red flag emoji, red flag emoji, red flag emoji. I knew it was a red flag, and I noted it silently. I asked when we'd see each other again, and he immediately invited me to Budapest the following month. Pause. There's a lot of material here. It's consistent with stuff we've talked about. I've talked a lot. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Oops, sorry, I was unmuting everyone. Yeah, there is a lot here. Let me just scroll back a little. It's very, very interesting. What's striking to me is that he really is expressing a lot of emotional vulnerability with you and a lot of openness, and yeah, vulnerability. Um, Interesting. I think it's important to note, the neurodiversity because I think that that can really obviously impact the way that we interact and, of course, the way that we're viewing things like through an attachment lens. Um, while there are elements of his behavior throughout the letter that really suggest avoidance, I'm really getting the opposite of dismissive avoidant in a lot of these behaviors and a lot of these interactions.
Hmm.
The nature of his relationship with his ex, how he's being with you, the fact that he's posting these stories. It makes me feel like his behavior, and not that attachment styles aren't somewhat rooted or can't be rooted in trauma, but it's making me feel that his behavior um, might have a lot more to do with his specific experiences than perhaps his attachment style. And that's just the feeling I'm getting so far.
Yeah. Can I also say it is quite common for particularly avoidantly attached men who are on this, who have a lot of shame wounding, to have had a period where they've been, we'll use some of the terms, sofa hopping, self-medicating through weed, only to go through a self-help guru style transformation where they preach love and light and their million-dollar business as a way of almost discarding their, you know, unattractive fuckboy past life and embracing the light of their productive, new facelift, if you will. And on one hand, it's impressive, the shift they've gone from self-destructive to a seemingly more constructive life. But I want to make it clear, like I said earlier, this is not deep integration. Trading one life for another doesn't mean you've really healed. What it means is you've just found a way to adjust the coping mechanism to soothe the shame that you have inside of you. And it is far more societally recognized to be a multi-millionaire travel guru than to be someone who's sofa hopping and self-medicating through weed.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So continuing with Mandy, she writes, in February, we met in Budapest and stayed in another beautiful hotel. I'm getting jealous of all the beautiful hotels. He worked constantly, and his workaholism became, there we go, his workaholism became apparent. He was still very present with me, though. The sex was deeply emotional, and he said he felt strongly connected to me, and still couldn't believe he was with me again. However, one day he told me his mum had, quote unquote, hated me when we were younger, and hadn't believed my dad kicked me out. I remember her saying something quite similar at the time, but she had never been unkind to me directly. And we used to chat on the phone a lot. She would just call me for chat sometimes. It felt like he'd catastrophized her views, especially when he admitted he hadn't told her we were seeing each other because she'd quote unquote flip out. I don't know why, but I didn't say anything. Quick note, that sounds like strong enmeshment. So it sounds to me like she obviously triangulates. She does not, she presents one way with you, but she's not telling you the full truth. And it sounds like she's strongly, in a codependent way, connected with him. And that explains his relationship with his girlfriend because clearly he's got a thing where he obviously has, issues with boundaries and women and he hasn't obviously been able to separate himself from his mum.
The relationship with his mom is very striking, and the way that he's speaking about it, if if you heard this, you wouldn't think that this is coming from a 40-year-old man, and I'm not saying that to shame him, but it sounds like this is his inner teenager coming out. Like she's going to be really mad if we're seeing each other again, and she doesn't think you're a good influence on me or something like that. Meanwhile, I'm pretty sure he's 40 years old at this time. So, I agree that it seems to be that there's a pretty strong degree of enmeshment here, which is absolutely going to impact your adult romantic relationships in a really big way. And it's going to make it really hard for you to interact with your partner a lot of the time in a way where you feel like you're interacting with your partner and not your parent.
And can I also add too, because you just made a really interesting point to me, which is this is exactly what he said to her about his ex-girlfriend. Remember how he said, "Oh, I can't, like share that we're together because my ex-girlfriend will find out." It's like, why is her, with all due respect, why does it matter? Like, I understand respecting the dignity of a previous relationship, but I think we're past the point of that.
Yeah, he seems to have this weird, not weird, he seems to have sort of, it's like he's shifting responsibility a lot to the women in his life. Like he's shifting some responsibility onto Mandy and sort of putting her up on a pedestal. Like she saves him and like she, you know, keeps him okay. And then when he lost her, he had to rely on all of these other coping mechanisms. And then now his mom is responsible for some sort of separation or withholding in the relationship, and he's worried about his ex and what he's posting on Instagram, and he doesn't really appear to be behaving in a rooted or secure way.
Completely agree with everything that you've said. So let's continue. Halfway through the trip, he had a 2-day argument with his ex about business shares. She still owned, what the hell? She still owned part of his company, but barely did any work, and the conflict clearly rattled him. He later admitted he'd been closer to her parents than to his own, and that this was actually a big part of why he'd stayed in the relationship. Her parents had even bought them a flat. When they moved in together, he threw himself into luxury travel content creation, which I suspect helped him create novelty and distance in the relationship. Yes. He also mentioned that they had a routine of quote unquote not taking on long haul business class flights so they could have more me time, which I'm certain he initiated. One afternoon, I mentioned that my ex had let his family treat me badly and that I wouldn't put up with the dynamic now and would walk away. His face fell silent. Sorry, his face fell instantly, and his mood shifted for the rest of the day. And then his first avoidant wobble came that evening. While discussing when we'd next see each other over dinner, he casually said, "By the way, I was going to ask what you're looking for because I'm not ready for a relationship." Wow. Wow. Can I say that actually feels a bit more like punishment and not just avoidance?
That is wild. I was so surprised when I read that line, even having read the whole let like it's not only, yes, does it feel like punishment and not avoidance 100%. It also feels so young, like so emotionally immature. These are two fully grown adults having a conversation. They've known each other for 20 years. They've been exchanging all of this information, vulnerability, closeness. And she mentioned one sort of boundary that she has in relationship, and she sees his face fall. And instead of there being a discussion like, hey, can we talk about this? I sense that there might be some tension here. Maybe there's some hard dynamics we have to talk about. He just casually drops, by the way, I'm not really ready for anything serious. It's stunning. It's actually stunning.
Yeah, so I was going to say quickly, when people say avoidance premeditate their breakups, I think that can be true for some, but this doesn't sound premeditated at all. If anything, it sounds to me like a bit of a whiplash moment.
Yes, yes. It feels very reactionary. It feels very okay, I sense, and so this is kind of the first thing that I was alluding to earlier when I mentioned, so to me, this was really feeling like, okay, we're deep into fearful avoidant territory here.
Yeah.
But this, but it's interesting because he has so many, I feel like he has so many fearful avoidant traits and behaviors, but then also some very dismissive avoidant traits and behaviors. And obviously that's not uh, of course, that happens all the time, but the combination of behaviors to me is very interesting and kind of unique and stunning. This I think is a more DA way to handle something like this, to casually say, by the way, I wasn't, by the way, we're not really together, just so you know, even though we've done all of this stuff together. Um, yeah, it's very interesting.
Can I ask you this? Because you're like, I think your knowledge, with all due respect, and I'm not saying this as false, praise for you. I truly believe this. I think you are far better than me at delineating the shape of the attachment style in people. Like, from a criteria standpoint, I'm often amazed when you read it and you're like, this is a dismissive leaning FA. This is an anxious leaning FA. This is a whatever it may be. This is a pizza. But, well, the one thing I will say that I really respect about you is how you can clump it together. But one thing I noted, and even in the way you said that was, and this is me going back to something I was saying throughout this letter reading, is I wonder if it feels odd for you because it almost feels like there is a dismissive avoidant part and a fearful avoidant part. It's not like normally, I think with the presentations, you might agree with me, it feels like it's a fearful avoidant presentation that's leaning dismissive. Not, it's two separate entities that have entered the chat at different points in time. Like, and that's why I wanted to share that because it kind of goes back to what I was saying is I feel like he's very fragmented in his identity, and I feel like it's not a coherent identity.
You went into my brain and organized my scramble of thoughts and just articulated that perfectly. Yes. Yes, I think that is exactly what I was trying and failing to say coherently, Ken. Yes.
Be-
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, the way it shows up is not like, to me, it sort of feels like there's not a coherent identity in his stuff. And usually, when there's a coherent organizing principle for someone, we usually see its flavor being quite consistent and, uniform in a way. This is not that.
Yes, exactly. The flavor is usually consistent. You can usually see there's a more clear home base. It's somebody's leaning a certain way, but they're more firmly rooted in one way. Whereas here, and yes, fearful avoidant people with fearful avoidant attachment do have, some traits that are anxious, some traits that are avoidant, but they also have fearful avoidance is its own unique attachment style as well. It's not just anxious and avoidant 50-50 or like sometimes. And so um it seems like he's not going down one path, leaning one direction and then leaning the other. It's like he's jumping from two different paths and it's very unpredictable. And I can imagine how dysregulating this must have been for you, Mandy, because, right, when people are behaving in an unpredictable way, that freaks us out. That removes a lot of security that we feel. Predictability to a large degree is something that we need in relationships to feel safe. And obviously, with this last, bomb he dropped, he's proving to be quite unpredictable.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. I think to me, the thing that really strikes to me is the fact that it's unpredictable enough to be engaging with someone who's a severely avoidantly attached person. But to me, this takes it up a notch because it feels like his organizing principles are adjusting, based on, what's happening in the moment. So, and that shouldn't, I don't want to say should, but it usually that's not how it works. Usually it's one set of organizing principles in the psyche, not shifting gears quite so rapidly like that. But anyways, it is dysregulating because Mandy says, I silently stood up and went to the bathroom and cried, feeling like an idiot who'd misread everything. The intimacy, the way he said he'd miss me for 20 years, promises to take me to different places around the world. When I came back, he seemed confused by my reaction. I said it sounded like he didn't want to see me anymore. I wanted to date other people. I'm sorry, and oh no, I said it sounded like he didn't want to see me anymore or wanted to date other people. He laughed and insisted that wasn't the case. He talked about, well, this is apropos what we're talking about. He talked about needing to find himself after a long codependent relationship and asked what I wanted. I told him I wasn't open to casual, if that's what he wanted, and if that was the case, we should end things. I said I wanted a relationship. Long distance was fine, and eventually we'd need to live in the same place. He smiled and told me he didn't want to see anyone else, that he wasn't going anywhere, that I was special, and he'd waited 20 years for this, but needed to take things slowly. That night we fell asleep hugging, and the next morning he reassured me again. Confusing whack conversation from his end. Like, I mean, to me, I'd be like, where the fuck are we at?
Completely. It's such a roller coaster in such a short amount of time. And also, I just want to clap for you here, Mandy, because the way that you handled this conversation was perfection. The fact that you very clearly said, hey, I'm not looking for casual. we can take it slow, we can do long distance, but eventually we need to live in the same place. These are such secure boundaries, and the way that you communicated your needs and your expectations was beautiful. And I'm really getting the sense throughout the letter that you have done a lot of work to, earn more secure attachment, and that is really apparent. And I hope that you feel empowered in those conversations and in the way that you are protecting yourself.
Let's keep going. So, um, and I can probably get through these two because typically for people who just understand the method of my madness, I comment on stuff that's relevant, but sometimes when we get into the heart of it, it starts to reiterate stuff that we've already formulated from the beginning. And if not, I'll obviously draw attention to it. So if I start to speed up now, it's not because I necessarily want to like race to the bitter end. It's more just because it might be because a lot of the material is setting up to things that we've predicted or we've already established from the beginning, but we'll go from there. Anyways, blah, blah, blah. We didn't see each other for 2 months while I interviewed for a six-figure semi-remote role that would let me travel with him more. He'd encouraged me to go for it and help me prep for the interviews. During that time, he told old uni friends we were back together, told his new friends about me, and arranged for me to see his cousins and sister in Spain. He traveled constantly, sent videos of apartments he wanted to buy in Abu Dhabi, asked for my opinion, talked about me flying to Japan for my birthday, invited me to Lisbon and Lake Como, and even suggested spending a couple of months each year at mine in the UK, adding he would ship things he'd need to my house in the next few months. We met in Lisbon in April at a luxury hotel. He introduced me to some friends who were all from around the world. They were kind, but I realized they didn't truly know him. I watched him people please to fit in. Two of them invited me to their safari wedding in October, and he said I should definitely come. I want to add a note about his character here. He's always upbeat, the funniest guy in the room, so affable, and I really love this aspect of him, but it's a bit of a mask. In private, I could break through this and get a more emotional and grounded version of him. I will return to that, but I will continue for now. One day on the trip, I had an anxiety spiral. I was working remotely and something went wrong at work, and I learned I didn't get the job after the final interview, and his not ready for a relationship comment weighed on my mind. He'd also suddenly stopped including me in stories and kept bringing up his ex both fondly and critically. I didn't say anything, I just sulked, which is a personal trait I need to work on. And when we were younger, he'd tease me out of it, but this time he just froze. I apologized, and he told me it was fine and I was allowed to have emotions, assuming it was work related. We flew to Madrid where I met three of his cousins. He felt a little distant and he started sleeping with his back to me, and bizarrely took me to his ex's favorite clothes shop, skull emoji, which made me sulk again. Over dinner, I apologized a second time. He seemed irritated by the apology, but eventually said quietly, I really care about you. I'm not judging you. I just worry about you. I just want to see you happy. I still couldn't admit why I'd been really upset. In Valencia, I met his sister who was thrilled to see me. He was um he was affectionate but kind of distant. He talked about future trips, but kept mentioning his ex all the fucking time. I flew home feeling weird as fuck, like he wasn't over his ex and that my sulking might have turned him off. Okay, I want to share my thoughts and feelings on what I've just shared so far. The key things to me that I think really stand out are I want to be very clear about the way I'm about to use this word. His need to mask, I'm going to approach this not from a perspective of neurodivergence, but from a perspective of social anxiety and also from a perspective of trauma. I think his upbeatness is probably a way to mitigate the shame he feels inside of himself and is not actually genuine all of the time. I do think there probably is an upbeatness to him that you admire. As Amy has said many times, his emotional maturity is that of a teenager, and teenagers can have an upbeat quality to them, which is both affectionate but also problematic if you're trying to have an adult relationship with them. I also hear the sulking piece, and look, I'm not about to judge or moralize that part of you. It sounds to me like that's something that you obviously recognize you need to work on, but to me, it's not the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room to me is Ralph. To me, it's not about saying you don't have stuff to work on. Absolutely think there's some things to consider here for the future, but now is not the time or place for that. I think to me, what I sense in this is more of a reaction to how he is involving his ex-wife in conversations to distance himself from you, and the way he's also finding ways to position himself where he doesn't have to sit with the discomfort you're feeling, which I think he's creating to make himself feel better. So this is where I'd say now I feel like there's some intentionality behind his distancing tactics. That's my piece for now. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I find the way that he's communicating with you to be very disconnected and removed from like the relationship and reality. It doesn't seem like he's facing you and looking you in the face and saying, "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Let's talk about this." It's sort of like the fact that you're upset or that there's obviously something to talk about is sort of getting in the way of this perfect trip that he has planned and getting in the way of you guys just happily walking around and being tourists or doing whatever you're doing. Um, there's like a sense of flightiness to it. I'm getting the sense that he's just sort of very wrapped up in continuously moving and forward movement and not really ever just sitting down and being in the moment and really seeing and hearing you. And, you know, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? I mean, we know that he found a lot of comfort and maybe some dependence with weed earlier on to try to numb out. And now that he's not doing that anymore, he's traveling a lot and he's making a lot of money and he has this multi-million-dollar travel business and he's in these sort of not that this is maybe stressful as somebody would traditionally say, but traveling so frequently and going to all of these big, beautiful, luxurious hotels and exotic destinations, it's sort of like this continuous high, this continuous adrenaline rush of forward movement. And it's like he can't just sit still. Um, and, I think that it makes a lot of sense if we remember that, there was a traumatic moment in his life, maybe several. And trauma of any nature can really create this disconnection from self and make us the opposite of connected with ourselves and with others, and even with where we are. Um, Another thing, no one masks harder and better than an avoidantly attached person. And that's really both fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant. And obviously, there are nuances and differences, but truly, the whole part of the reason, a large part of the reason why avoidantly attached people don't like making future plans or having to commit to things ahead of time is because they're already pre-exhausted about all of the masking they're going to have to do when they're out.
Yep.
And if your avoidance experience the same thing, maybe slightly differently or to a different degree, but it is exhausting. And I could speak from experience on that one.
Especially if you've got a lot of shame, like, your motivation is mustn't touch that ever. So, it becomes that toxic positivity piece as well. And on a separate note, but relating to what you were mentioning, Mandy, you mentioned how that comment of, oh, I'm not looking to be in a relationship right now, still weighed on you. Of course it weighed on you. Like, I mean, if I wasn't just obsessing about that, I'd be feeling like something is very wrong here. Like, that is a very alarming comment to make. And then coupled with the behavior, it's like we are well and truly at the carnival of the red flags at this stage. Like, this is, and I mean, the whole freaking referencing of the ex is just, I'll touch on that briefly. Like, I feel like I don't need to labor that one. But to me, I'm just like, that's just fucking annoying and also just deeply disrespectful. It's one thing to have come out of a relationship and to still have a bit of unfinished business, which you deal with it with a therapist. You can, I think it's okay to talk about it every now and then with your partner to be like, this is a stage that I'm at and I'm navigating this. Here's the bits that you need to know. Can we talk about this? Yes, no. Okay. If I can't talk about it with you, I'll talk about it with someone else. That's totally fine. But he has not, God, like he's not committed to breaking up with her. He may have broken up with her on paper, but he has not broken up with her. It doesn't mean you're a rebound, but it means you're not getting all of him because he's not even giving all of himself to anyone at this stage, from the sounds of it. So there's that. I do believe that a lot of the connection here, I don't doubt that, but I do think that I think he's prioritizing how much of himself he gives for trauma reasons. Anyways, before our May trip, he mentioned his ex in a text message. Oh, Jesus. And I finally told him calmly that it made me uncomfortable and I felt compared. Good on you. He was defensive at first, insisting he was over her, but later reassured me he didn't want me to feel that way. After that, he barely mentioned her in person again and even moved his subscriptions and mail from her address to mine. He seemed to believe she was still single and would be upset he was traveling with someone new, using their business to fund the trips, which he said was why he didn't show me in his videos. Bullshit. Of course, I didn't tell him I'd stalked her socials and she was clearly already dating a close friend, which he seemed oblivious to. There we go. At the start of May, I flew into Milan and met him at Lake Como. He seemed strangely grumpy at first, but relaxed after an hour, and the rest of the trip felt calm. I apologized again for my anxiety on the previous trip, and he simply said it was fine and that he was glad to see me more relaxed this time. I think that's a fawning thing there for you, Mandy. I don't think you needed to necessarily apologize for your anxiety. I think to me, my comment there is to say, no, I think that I think you were responding reasonably given the dynamic dysfunction caused by Ralph. On our last day, I sensed hesitation while he looked at his travel schedule to see where I could join him for the rest of the year. When I asked what was wrong, he suddenly said, I think I've lost feelings. The butterflies are gone. I stayed calm and replied, okay, then let's end this because I can't do this. Good on you. He paused and he said he hated the thought of not seeing me, that I was important, and added, sex with you is special. I don't need to drink. I don't have panic attacks. I feel calm. It feels like you're healing my childhood trauma. Oh, God. We're going to return to that point. He added, it's like I'm healing in this relationship, but then I wonder if I'm just attached because you know, I'm annoyed at the avoidant language here. And he goes, but then I wonder if I'm attached because you're healing me. So it's not real love. Okay, pause. I need to pause before I fucking shoot someone. We need to get out of this false binary. Oh, I'm just attached, therefore it's not real love. No! Both things can coexist at once. I want to say something really rude to Ralph. I feel like Amy, you're gonna laugh too much if I continue along this path. Do you want to take over before I do damage?
Oh my God. Okay, let me compose myself. Okay. Where to begin? And this is, and back to what we were saying before about there seeming to be these two very different lanes that he's switching from. Um, I'm pretty sure that no DA that I've ever spoken to is ever going to tell their partner, I feel like you're healing me.
No.
No, that is the antithesis to what people with dismissive avoidant attachment usually believe, which is, you know,
You're
um,
smothering me.
there's nothing yeah, you're smothering me, and also I'm the only one who can heal me, and you're the only one who can heal you, which, by the way, is not wholly untrue. But obviously, when we're dealing with extremes, it's very hard to make sense of things. But um, it's striking again not and we were just speaking about the switching lanes between the attachment styles, but there also seems to be switching lanes between like an adult self, a teenage self, a child self, the way that he deals with you and interacts with you, and then the way that he says these sorts of like it's so interesting, it's so striking. Um the way he's speaking to you, it feels like, and maybe this could be the part of it that could have something to do with neurodivergence, but it feels like he's just having these thoughts and communicating them to you as if they are not significant and meaningful things that really need to be fleshed out and discussed in terms of your relationship. It feels like he's just thinking them, they're coming into his mind and he's just sort of blurting them out as if they are really casual things when they're not. And he doesn't, I'm getting the sense that he doesn't really understand the nature of these things and the appropriate setting in which to talk about these sorts of topics.
Yeah, to me, it's sort of like someone who tunes into astrology and goes, "Oh, it's a full moon, that's why I'm burnt out." It's like, no, you're burnt out, and that's significant in and of itself. Like, the moon's role might indeed have an influence on how you're feeling, but also you're burnt out. Like, let's address the significance of this. To me, it's like, okay, you're actually discussing some pretty significant things that you're bringing up in an almost casual way. Maybe this is, oh, like, I'll read it out. Maybe I'm just in love with our story. Then it feels like something's missing. I just feel flat and not excited anymore. It's like, I'm sorry, this is significant information. And also, he's treating it almost like it's a very whimsical thing. Oh, I'm just, unsure if this is reality. I'm unsure if you're really who I'm meant to be with. It's like, bro, you can't just switch lanes like that after you told her she was healing you. Like, I mean, if you want to, you can, but you're going to give someone serious fucking trauma as a consequence. Like, to me, I really sense, I think a key thing too is, and I wonder if you feel the same, he just sounds incredibly disassociated as well.
Yeah, I think so. I do. And the sad thing is that, again, experiencing trauma at any age can create sometimes an increasingly sense of disconnection with yourself and with others. And, this is very, I think, more typically fearful avoidant behavior and like thought process where the presence of a healthier, more secure love and somebody who's wanting and willing to be with you and emotionally attuned to you sort of translates to you as flat or boring or a loss of attraction when really it's just a loss of being triggered. It's a loss of unsafety. The presence of safety and of somebody just wanting to simply be with you can actually be very rattling to someone with fearful avoidant attachment or to someone with trauma because it sort of forces you to be present, to stop for a minute and just be in the moment. And as we can see throughout this letter, it seems like he has a problem with staying put for more than a day. And you seem to be rather grounded and a calming presence for him, as he's even alluded to or directly said to you in this letter before, Mandy. So I'm not surprised through an attachment lens to hear him say these things like, maybe I'm just attached because you're healing me and it's not real love. Like looking at that sentence, it's so interesting, right? Because maybe a more securely attached person would look at that and say, like you said, Ken, why can't it be both? Why can't my security and my love for you be helping you heal and it be real love? Um, and the fact that he said, maybe I'm just not in love with our story. Again, he's speaking about this relationship as if like he's not the one in it, our story, and not just maybe I'm not in love with you. That's something that's missing. I'll tell you what, that's something that's missing, and that something that's missing is, you know, chaos or something else that can be distracting. Feeling flat and not excited anymore. Fearful avoidants have a real problem or a real issue with understanding that a flat feeling is can be healthy. Um, it's so interesting. It really is. I'm sorry, you guys, that I keep saying that, but it
Yeah,
is.
I think the nervous system's favorite love language is just boredom. Not boredom in the context that nothing brings it to life, but in the terms of regulation, absolutely. In a relationship, you want fire, not too much, not nothing. But the nervous system, it's like, you know, as I was joking to Amy earlier today, that's like an iPhone from 2018. Just let it charge and do its own thing because it will die very quickly if it's, turned on for more than an hour. It needs rest. And his life is like, even reading this, my brain is like, far out. It's hard to keep up with Ralph because he's everywhere and nowhere at once. So, you know, if witnessing this letter is like witnessing Ralph's dysregulation. It may look exciting. It may look, all very cool with the travel, but far out. I'm like, I want to turn my brain off because it's just like, it's too much even for me with like listening to all this. Again, not Mandy, your writing. Your writing's fantastic. It's more just Ralph's mind and the way he operates is making my head do spins. Mandy reacts to Ralph's monologue saying, "My stomach lurched. It was a chaotic monologue." Before I continue, I actually want to say maybe we should do this as like an ongoing series, Amy, where it feels like we're decoding, these deep relationships as part of like an ongoing series. I know we kind of are, but I was just thinking about it from like, the perspective of like big, like if we get big letters like this in the future, I think it almost becomes like a moment where we're unpacking like a murder that's been happening in real time.
I kind of like that idea. And I'm very much a long content, a long form content girly.
I'm
Like
not.
give me the long podcast episodes, give me the long letters. I love it. If I see something online that's only a few minutes, like I'm not a short reels girl. No, give me the longest podcast possible.
It's funny because I'm the complete opposite. I'm like, just tell me what I need to know. And so for me, I'm like, for me, this is where, I know it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, I just want to know the salient bits. And I'm like, right, here's what you got to know. But I will admit, I feel like what I'm enjoying about this aspect, I think it's also because Mandy's writing is fantastic. And also, Amy, I enjoy working with you, is it does feel like unearthing a lot of archaeology particularly in Ralph's psyche. And it's his psyche is fascinating. And I'm glad I've got to be honest. I'm sure there's a lot of great stuff with Ralph. I'm not here to dismiss that. I'm personally glad I'm not dating the guy because it sounds like it would be it would be up there with the travel.
I mean, I would like to go to all of these places. But yes, it sounds like dating him is the opposite of secure and calm and safe, and that's really hard. It's really, really hard.
It is. It is. But I have to give Mandy credit where it's due. Like, I mean, I think she's actually, given the context of the circumstances, she's obviously worked on herself prior to this too. Yes, there's room to grow. But I think she's, given the glitz, the gloss, the travel, and also the history of love that they've shared together, I think, honestly, given the context, she's been navigating, a really, really intense ride. And so, being in a relationship with Ralph means you're getting also in a relationship with what's going on internally with him too. Mandy continues, I held his hand and said, maybe calmness and love can feel unfamiliar if chaos and detachment is the baseline. Oh my God. Brilliant, brilliant sentence. Mandy, you obviously are not only an exceptional writer, but you're obviously very insightful. This might actually be what healthy attachment feels like. He admitted he'd never shared intimate things with his ex, saying she wasn't the kind of person you'd share that stuff with. I apologized again for my anxiety on our last trip. He laughed lightly, saying, yeah, you were a bit difficult. Wow, that's condescending. That's not okay that he said that. But insisted it hadn't changed anything. I told him I'd felt compared to his ex, and he said, no, never. You're like chalk and cheese in every aspect. You're both beautiful, but you have a stronger, more admirable character. I didn't really love the beauty comparison. Yeah, I bet you didn't. It's not okay. He described giving everything in his last relationship and still failing to make her happy, and he thinks she left because of the constant traveling. He also said how the idea of anyone or anything stopping him traveling made him feel like a caged animal, and rage would build up inside of him. I suggested travel might be how he regulated his nervous system now, instead of wait. Ah, there we go. Um, Little self-satisfied moment there from me. I apologize, but I enjoy those moments. He nodded and said, maybe my life is the ultimate expression of an avoidant lifestyle. Well done, Ralph, for your self-awareness at in your 40s, where clearly you haven't done a lick of therapy to work through this. I shared how I see relationships, two people building something together, and he admitted, a huge part of me finds that appealing, I can't lie. When I said I'd love to build this company with him and have his back from day one, he said quietly, I know. He admitted he was exhausted by traveling and that part of him just wanted to stop. He then revealed he'd only been broken up with his ex for 4 months when we reconnected, not a year. She'd put his belongings in storage without telling him while he was on a trip, and he'd not had the chance to say goodbye to her parents. He said she sometimes called him an emotionless robot, that sex with her always required alcohol, and that he'd compared her to me throughout their entire relationship. Fuck me. I mean, look, I understand she's got some behavior that seems not great and conducive for a relationship, But he also doesn't sound like he's, treating her with dignity and respect either.
Yeah, and it's not really surprising that she was calling him an emotionless robot, um, and that their intimacy required alcohol because, again, to have emotional attunement with someone and to have an emotionally fulfilling exchange, you need to be present. You need to at least be okay in your body to be with another person for a few minutes at a time so that real connection can happen. And I think that he might really struggle with that. And it sounds like she got fed up after 12 years. And I have a feeling that their relationship probably carried on much longer than maybe it would have had she not worked for him and had there not been business entanglements. Perhaps it ultimately became a relationship of convenience. Interesting that Ralph's ex's parents seem to be significant in his life. Um,
Mm,
Interesting.
indeed. So just switching over to Amy, because I'm happy for you to take over from here. I'll let you continue with Mandy's story.
Okay, sounds great. Here we go. By the end of the conversation, we were holding hands with our foreheads touching. Aw. He said, I've cared about you for 20 years. I don't want to let you go. We agreed we would both start therapy independently. That night, he held me and talked warmly about future trips. The next morning, he said he wanted to keep seeing me as we were planned to visit London next month. I thanked him for being open and said how a couple of repairs after conflict matters more than constant highs. So true and such a securely attached thought. He smiled and said, I love having you in my life. I apologized for any pain I caused years ago when I ended it, and he brushed it off. We were kids, adding, That's why it's so good knowing you now. I think we can heal each other. Whew, I think we can heal each other. That is a very loaded comment, and we will go back to that. For the next month, we video called every 3 days to help manage the insane anxiety I now had around the relationship. He seemed fine with it, telling me he felt the least pressure with me out of anyone he'd dated, which reassured me at the time. Silly me. He invited me to, okay, now forgive me. Will you help me with this pronunciation, Ken?
I think it's Seychelles.
Ah, okay. Okay.
I'm assuming.
It's
But it sounds like an exotic location.
okay. He invited me to an exotic location, which Amy's uncomfortable pronouncing, in July, calling it super romantic, but I wasn't sure work would approve at the time, so I declined. He sounded understanding, but was clearly deflated, and I sensed he had hoped a romantic setting might reignite the spark.
Ooh.
You might be right, Mandy. Before we next met, I made a comment on a video that I later regretted. I told him about a friend who was so focused on securing her relationship that once it felt safe, she would realize she didn't actually like the person for who they were and would then moan about them and come to resent them. He went quiet over the next day, and I panicked, thinking he thought that I was like that, maybe. I texted to clarify it was just an observation, something both of us might experienced with exes. He replied, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't even make the connection between you and me. He assured me he was fine, but I wasn't convinced.
Hmm.
Do you want to pause here, Ken?
Keep going, because I feel like, I think to me in my head, there's material here that I think we can summarize, in a minute, because already ahead I can see the term ROCD has reared its head. And I think that I want to sort of summarize some of these key points because I think they all link together.
Perfect. Okay. He went to a rock festival the week before staying with me in June. I had a strong feeling he'd talk about his ROCD to friends and get terrible advice to follow his gut feelings. He messaged infrequently at the festival, and I felt that old panic, like trying to hold on to a wet bar of soap. I found myself waiting for his texts. He spent 3 days in London for meetings, staying in a hotel before coming to mine. He told me he was feeling really unwell. When he arrived at mine, he looked terrible, exhausted, coughing, worn down. He'd been silent the night before, and now it made sense. He was pretty sick. That weekend was the most intimate we'd been. The sex felt deeply connected, and he kept commenting on it. He also kept blurting out that London was, in quotes, trying to convince him to come back, and then kept giving reasons he could never live in my flat. The squeaky bed, the fence height, how much his mum wouldn't like my neighbors, and the lack of a desk. By the way, he doesn't have one either. We traveled from London to Ibiza. He wasn't getting better with his illness, but was incredibly affectionate. I'd catch him looking at me with his dazed but kind of half sad smile a lot. The connectedness continued. In Valencia, he had sex with me the moment we arrived at our apartment, saying he could never resist me. When we realized that the air conditioning in his mom's apartment was broken, he spiraled about telling her, convinced she'd be furious. Her reply was kind and practical. He seemed almost confused, certain she was playing games. It was obvious how his childhood wiring had primed him for chaos in their interactions. This is a 40-year-old man freaking out about how his mom might respond to something.
Mm. Do you want to do one more paragraph and then we'll reflect on what we've read so far?
Perfect. We stayed at his sister's boyfriend's villa, and even with all the rest, he got even sicker, now with conjunctivitis. Ooh. I looked after him, bringing drinks and encouraging him to rest. I wanted to ask for a relationship check-in, but decided to wait until he felt better. I noticed he people pleased everyone, me, his sister, her boyfriend, and he froze whenever preferences clashed, like he didn't know who to please. I noticed throughout his entire trip, he held my hand constantly, always reaching for it when it wasn't already in his.
This, okay, there's a lot of things that I think are worth talking about. We're seeing a lot of the manifestations of things we talked about earlier. You know, I, one thing I want to address, and I don't know about you, Amy, is I am feeling a dizziness, thinking about all the locations he's been. Like, Seychelles, if that's how we pronounce it, I apologize if that's not the right way to pronounce it. London, Ibiza, Valencia, Mum's apartment. Like, fuck me dead. Like, my brain's just like, where is Carmen San Diego? Like, it's almost like, where is Ralph San Diego? Like, Jesus Christ Almighty. And, you know, I wish we could record with your face, but obviously for privacy reasons we don't, because I'd love to share your reaction to that. But it's just like, holy hell, Ralph just doesn't know how to stay still.
It's a lot. It feels glamorous and exciting on one hand, but then also it doesn't feel sustainable. Like where are your roots? Where do you kick back and relax? Where do you, I don't know, it feels like a never-ending carnival ride, which is something that can feel oddly regulating if you have a lot of internal chaos that you are trying to numb yourself from and distract, right? Because the second you're still, you have room to think and to reflect and to feel. And this constant movement is really dizzying, as exciting as it sounds. It does feel quite exhausting and chaotic.
Also, going back to a thing that you've mentioned repeatedly is how a 40-year-old man is freaking out about his mum might respond to something. I know that's been a theme that we've touched on a few times, but it shows the depth of the trauma and the enmeshment. Like it really suggests that that relationship he has with his mum, speaks volumes. He expects her to play games with him. He expects her to be, cruel and savage, yet she responds with kindness and practicality. I don't disbelieve his assumptions of her because usually, that can be a presentation with mums. I don't believe that, that fear came out of nowhere. But I think that what's striking is how tethered he is to his mum. It's like, where are the boundaries at? Where's the separation at, with her? And also, another thing that we haven't talked about too is also, well, much of. his ex-partner seems like she's just making do with like the best of the situation. And again, I acknowledge she may have her own stuff that she needs to work on, but it's really interesting how there's a big disconnect with Ralph's head and reality. You know, he makes out that she's this financially needy, dependent woman who's codependent. And likely there are aspects of that that are true. But like his mum, he is also so concerned about things that aren't actually happening in the moment. Oh, my ex-girlfriend is not going to like me showing you off on socials, even though we broke up 4 months ago and she's already dating someone new. Oh, my mum is going to be mad with the air conditioning, even though she responds with kindness and practicality. He has such a distorted lens for looking at, significant women in his life. But I also feel like it's an act of avoidance as well, too. Like, I feel like it's almost like he's anticipating, as you said, the chaos as a way to distract him from the brewing intimacy and connectivity he's having with Mandy. I nearly lost the name for a second there.
Yeah, it does feel like that. And like you said, there's a reason why there are so many, it's making me think of this current phenomena of people, of elder millennials or millennials experiencing estrangement with their parents, right? There's this a large presence of adult children today expressing their concerns with their really troubled relationships with their parents. And so, when we see him, a 40-year-old man freaking out about how his mom is going to respond to something, that tells us that suggests some possibilities. One of them is that he did really have to deal with this a lot growing up, and that conditioned him to brace for severe impact if something small went wrong, or if something happened, or if his mom had a bad opinion about something or didn't like something. And when we look at how he's behaving and how he exhibited or expressed that sort of like rage and anger at the thought of him sort of having to stay in one place, or um, you know, that it seems like he feels very trapped. And like if anything starts to pull him down and try to secure him into one place too long, he freaks out and he leaves or he goes somewhere else. And that does feel very aligned with what might happen if somebody experiences enmeshment with a parent. It's like they feel there's this healthy codependent relationship where they feel dependent upon that person being okay with them. And at the same time, they resent the heck out of that person because that person, being the parent, is supposed to have made it her job to make sure that he was okay without any strings or conditions. And it's so complicated. And it really sucks that you know what really sucks, guys? It really sucks that it's true that as we get older, if we don't address our attachment stuff, which I truly believe most of us have than not have, it stays with us until we're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. This stuff does not just magically go away. It is work to work through our stuff. And to be honest, I get why a lot of people avoid it so damn hard.
But I prefer to honestly work on it than constantly be having, look, don't get me wrong, the multi-travel, multi-million dollar experience sounds fabulous on paper, but I know from an energetic perspective, it is so demanding and draining on your own internal resources. Your life can look like a dream. You share your Instagram profile and make it look like a bucket list thing of, all the places you could visit. But, it doesn't take Carl Jung to point out that having a glossy life comes with a lot of cost. And the cost is not just in the actual dollar amount, it can also be in what it's doing to you physically. One last thing I'll add before we continue too is Mandy made a really good point. She observed how his people pleasing led him to freeze whenever preferences clashed with others. I feel like he has no sense of self at all. And I know that's a constant theme that I've said, but I really feel like it's materializing. Like he does not know how to be himself at all. I feel like I imagine being himself feels like an absolute danger And this is a really great example of where if a person has come to reject their core self and you do not need to be avoidantly attached to have this problem. His presentation leans avoidant with his defensiveness, but it's not, but at the core, there's something much deeper going on, which is he cannot face himself and face that shame. And it sounds like whatever that childhood trauma was at the age of 15, would have been one of many significant cuts that led him to be like, I don't want to face me.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Ken, because that's such a significant part of the letter and this experience. And that's also something that I've seen is a much more fearful avoidant expression than a
Hmm.
dismissive avoidant expression. While dismissive avoidance can definitely be big people pleasers, um, you you know, they are pretty good about trying to meet their own needs. And if it comes between who am I going to please? Am I going to please all these other people or please myself? They will usually choose to please themselves, at least like in a more regular way. Where fearful avoidance really struggle to, and this is not me saying fearful avoidance can't be selfish or self-centered because everybody can, including fearful avoidance. But fearful avoidants really struggle to consider themselves in a meaningful way because they are so used to having to manage the feelings of all of the adults around them and making sure that everybody else is happy so that they could relax for a minute. And that is a very hard habit to break. And it's also, to your point, Ken, something that is sort of connected to this lack of knowing myself. Who am I outside of everybody else's needs and expectations of me, right? Um, yeah, it's definitely something I've seen in a fearful avoidance space for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, I know Megan and I have talked about this on and off camera, is this idea of chameleoning. And I think that many fearful avoidants engage in that act of masking and being a social chameleon just to get along. And I think it does stem from huge abandonment wounds that they have as well too. Now, my eyes glanced over at a phrase that came up that is, let's just say, textbook avoidant discard material. And I thought, let's go there because I feel like this train is about to come to a grinding halt. And it's going to be the train driver blaming the passengers.
Ooh, okay. Wow. Okay. That was a good picture to paint.
I mean, I haven't read the full context of what happened, but I'm already mentally like, oh dear, I know it's
Yeah.
coming. And I know like it's like that time in every letter where it's like, oh, here we go. It's that time
Right.
again.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, here we go. On our last day, I asked if he could come to London in August. He gave a vague smile and just nodded. I suddenly felt another avoidant wobble brewing. We visited his parents' beach house with his sister. He said he wanted us to stay there sometime, just us, but it felt like future faking. He ran into some of his mom's friends and didn't introduce me. He saw me notice and turned cold on me. At dinner, he was sharp. When I mentioned unused annual leave, he said, "Yeah, you should use that. Go take some trips," which stung. Oof, that does sting. Later, when I mentioned my Barcelona friends, I was going to see. Oh, later when I mentioned my Barcelona friends, I was going to see the next day, he cut in and said, "They sound like people I would never be friends with." Ew,
Ouch.
as if they don't want to be friends with you either. That night, while talking about his upcoming new life in Abu Dhabi, he tried to initiate sex. I stopped him and asked if we could have a check-in, and he snapped instantly. "I don't see a future with you. I don't find you attractive anymore. You give me the ick." I broke down, sobbing. "Of course you did. But you've barely kept your hands off of me," Mandy said. "I was forcing myself," he said. "I wanted to die." Then he accused me of putting too much pressure on him with all of the video calls. And he said I'd make him close down his business and get a normal job, which I've never suggested. I love his business. It was his mom who wanted to make him get a normal job. We'd spent the last few months discussing how I could make my work remote and travel with him. He also said, and Mandy put this in all caps, I never get my needs met in relationships. I said, you don't express your needs. And here's where I would insert a mic drop emoji because you are right, Mandy. Okay? A lot of avoidantly attached people, fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant, feel like they are in relationships where their needs are chronically unmet. And usually the number one cause of that is because they don't express their darn needs. Okay, I'm going to continue.
Or have boundaries.
Yes, yes, especially fearful avoidance. He immediately went quiet and said, I know. Moments later, he softened and offered, well, we can keep things as they are. I just don't want labels. It's too much pressure. But I
Ugh.
was done, too hurt to respond securely. I cried for hours while he tried to comfort me. I eventually fell asleep holding his hand, and in the morning, he thanked me for it. Once we were awake, he had flipped back from trying to convince me to stay to, I have no feelings and I have to let you go. He begged me not to block him, insisting we could be friends and that if we stayed friends, I'd be in his life forever. On the verge of tears, he called me the love of his life, but also said partners shouldn't heal each other and that relying on someone that much was unsafe. He said our story was too good to be true and life just isn't like that. He also said I deserved someone who could give me what I needed and that it was better that he shared his lack of feelings now than string me along. Ouch. I think we need to take a quick pause.
Fucking hell. Like, I mean, this is something that we haven't talked about, but I feel like he's at multiple times tried discarding Mandy and acquiesced. Like his people pleasing is on a whole another level. Like if we wind the clock back to when Mandy, I think, had mentioned something about what was it? Um, Let me go back because this was I remember like it was I think it was on page 2. There was a really important point that came up where Ah, um, there was the red flag about the ex, but it wasn't just that. Oh yeah, that was it. I mentioned that my ex had let his family treat me badly, and that I wouldn't put up with that dynamic now, and I'd walk away. So that was a moment where Mandy was telling everyone about, well, sorry, telling Ralph specifically, but for the context of the letter, she was bringing up how a previous ex's family had treated her badly, and she'd asserted boundaries and been like, "That's not okay." And he, in a bit of a triggered way, came up with her and said, "Well, I was going to ask what you're looking for because I'm not really ready for a relationship." He's done this really interesting thing where whenever his ego, he's felt shame. He's gone for a bit of a discard moment to be like, well, I need to push you away because I don't feel good about myself. And then Mandy rightfully is like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? And tries and is just like, I'm really hurt by this. And then he does this reverse thing where he people pleases and goes, well, maybe we can still be with each other and we can engage like we have, but let's not make it a relationship. And now he's done the same, being like, well, it's not labels. I feel like there's been micro discards before the discard that's happening right now that's been building up. And I feel like this is such bullshit for Mandy, meaning that it's so unfair what she's going through. It's highly abusive. This has been like a relationship of 1,000 discard cuts, where the final one I could imagine has just hurt more than all the others. And the way he's trying to frame it, like, he's going back on previous conversations. You know, am I just attached to you or just the story that we have? Is this real love? And now it's that no relationships should be healing. He began this fucking epic by saying how much she'd healed him. He, technically without her, he wouldn't have the multi-million-dollar business that he now has. What is going on here? And it's also massive projection too with his mum shit. Sorry for the rant.
No, that's why people are here, Ken. They're here for the rant.
Here for my rants, yeah. I get paid for ranting.
Whole point. This is the whole thing. Um, Again, it is striking to me this the seemingly casual nature in which he continues to drop these bombs. It feels the way I'm imagining this in my mind is that they're just sitting at this lovely restaurant, sitting for dinner. They're both reaching for the bread basket. He takes a bite and then he casually looks at her and says, "By the way, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. What should we order for dinner?" Like that's how it feels. Um, the most interesting thing I found was that he earlier he was talking about how amazing he felt with Mandy because she healed him. And this was such an amazing thing because she was healing him. And now he goes on to say, "You're the love of my life, but I don't want to be with you anymore because I don't really have feelings anymore. But also, you're the love of my life, but I don't want to be with you anymore. But definitely don't block me because I want to be in your life forever. But also, partners shouldn't heal each other, and that trying to rely on someone so much was unsafe. And our story is just too good to be true, and life is not like that." If this doesn't sum up the fearful avoidant experience, truly, I don't know what does. Um, it's a very, I think, common thing for fearful avoidance to fall into limerence with people and situations that they feel will save them because they feel so deeply disconnected with themselves and with their own ability to save and heal themselves. And so when they get into a relationship with someone, they pedestal this person and they think this is going to be the person that can save me and make me happy. And dismissive avoidants do that to a certain degree too, although they definitely don't communicate about it to the same degree at all. But talk about a roller coaster. What is one to do? What is one to do when you have someone in front of you saying things going back and forth like a ping pong ball in the same sentence, in the same hour? Um, I can't imagine how hard this was to endure, Mandy. And um, again, it just shows he's really so disconnected. He is so not grounded in. I'm not even sure if he is experiencing things as they're happening or if he sort of just dissociates and is disconnected. And then every few days, he'll let a few feelings trickle in. And the thing is also, um, it's not your fault if you dissociate. It's not your fault if you're disconnected from things. This is a result of trauma. This is like what trauma does to us. So I'm not ragging on Ralph for this. Now, that being said, again, and Ken and I will probably say this in every episode, our trauma is not our fault, but our healing is our responsibility. And the thing is, when you are an adult and you are in a relationship with someone, you really do have to try not to be reckless with people's feelings and with people's lives. It's not okay. It's not an excuse. Um, and I think he is acting very recklessly here.
Completely agree with you. Like, to me, I think the thing that's really dangerous about this dynamic from my perspective is that I feel like Mandy's well-being has been completely eroded by, Ralph's inability to do many things. Communicate his needs, have boundaries, sort out what's going on with both his mother and his ex-girlfriend, ground himself. I feel like he is so badly traumatized by his stuff, but instead of taking ownership and accountability for his trauma, he's, just doubling down on it and, hurting people in the process. I will say, my final thing I'll say two things I want to say before we continue is that phrase hurt people is such a oversimplification. I have worked with some trauma survivors who've gone through similar history to Ralph who do not hurt people. Sure, they may have accidentally hurt people as we do as we're growing up and learn, okay, that behavior is not conducive. Let's not do that again. And they learn, oh, I don't like it when this is done to me, so why would I do it to them? There are people out there who do not behave like this. Trauma may be on the table, but your choices in navigating your trauma are entirely up to you. Secondly, his whole projection of, you want me to settle down and have a normal business. Bro, take your conflict directly to your mum. Don't project that shit onto Mandy. That is straight up punishing language that he's using with Mandy, and it's so not okay and fair to her because she has, according to this, never said, you need to get a real job. No, she's actually, if anything, facilitated this relationship, trying to be very supportive, men, get her life to work with him. I just think it's absolute bullshit what's going on.
It really is. And I just want to say a few things before we move on, and then we'll move on. When this part where he says, where Mandy says, he tried to initiate sex. I stopped him, asked if we could have a check-in, and he snapped and said, I don't see a future with you. I don't find you attractive anymore. You give me the ick. In the same breath as he is trying to initiate sex. When I hear this, it makes me think of like a small child or like a 5-year-old who asked for cereal and then their parent or whoever gives them cereal and then they just knock the cereal off the table and say, I don't want this anymore. It's such a reactive young part of him, I think, that seems to be coming forward. I mean, this is not the work of an adult. This is not the work of a present adult. Um, Somebody who is secure and in connection with themselves is not going to initiate sex with someone, their partner ask, hey, can we talk about us? And then them say, oh, actually, I don't find you attractive anymore. You give me the ick. Also, and I'm so sorry, people who say you give me the ick, give me the ick. How's that, Ralph? Okay.
Okay.
And the last thing I'll say before we continue, sorry, what's that again?
No, no, you go. I just all I gotta say is I agree with everything you said. Keep going.
Um, Actually, yeah, that's all I have for now. We'll continue. Okay, let's see. His sister and her partner were oblivious to our argument and happily drove us to the station. With big sunglasses on and a large hat, they couldn't tell I'd been crying. They both hugged me twice before I left, with his sister squealing, come again soon. I love having you here. I wanted to break down. Ralph walked me to the platform and saw me onto the train. I cried the whole way to Barcelona. My friends met me later and they were amazing, checking in the entire trip. I honestly don't think I would have survived those 3 days without them. Oh, thank God for friends. Ralph messaged constantly, upbeat, and insisting I was thriving without him, even though I was having random panic attacks alone in a foreign city. We met again in London a week after I got home. He was still a bit unwell, but he was upbeat, saying breaking up was the right decision and the best thing for both of us. Eye roll emoji, appropriately used.
Agreed.
He told me he felt a he told me he felt a deeper connection to me after 6 months than to his ex after 12 years, describing that his prior relationship was completely shallow. Now, mind you, he's saying that in the same breath as saying it was the right decision to break up.
What a
We
what a what a
discussed,
trade-off. I'm gonna discard you and then validate the depth of our relationship.
yeah, we discussed attachment theory, and he said he would get therapy, saying we could try again later on. I don't know if this was genuine or not, but he did seem regretful at this point. He mentioned his sister and her boyfriend were shocked by our breakup and would welcome me anytime in Valencia. Putting his arm around me, he said, that would be nice, wouldn't it, if you came and stayed with us? I don't know if he was just trying to make me feel better in that moment. He repeatedly said he'd always be there for me. When I said I needed a period of no contact, he tried to convince me not to. I actually sobbed quite hard when saying goodbye, telling him I felt like I'd never see him again. He laughed and kissed my forehead, reassuring me that of course I would. We messaged for a few days after the closure chat. He told me he was looking into therapy and shared some resources. I told him I still needed a break, and after trying to convince me not to again, he said he'd be there when I was ready. I lasted 3 weeks. During that time, he continued to message me on Instagram, nudging me to reply. When I re-engaged, he was in Seychelles? Seychelles. He was somewhere. He was at a beach.
He was at a
And we
very
spoke.
exotic location.
Exactly. Feel free in the comments to teach me how to say this word. And we spoke daily for the next 6 weeks. He sent long messages and double messaged if I didn't respond. This makes me so angry. He seemed obsessed with telling me I was thriving without him. I'll just read one more paragraph and then we'll comment. 6 weeks later, he posted a story hinting at a woman being with him in the French Riviera. The effing nerve.
This guy. This guy is such a see you next Tuesday. I'm just saying it. Like, I mean, I can respect the fact that there are some parts of him that are fantastic to be with, but he's behaving like such an asshole.
See you next Tuesday. Absolutely. Okay. 6 weeks later, he posted a story hinting at being with a woman in the French Riviera. The nerve. I let mental gymnastics convince me that it was his sister, and he
Oh, never do
mostly
that.
kept her
Never,
presence hidden.
never do the mental gymnastics in these situations.
Not the sister. It's never the sister. He mostly kept her presence hidden while texting me constantly during the trip. When it became clear that this person had flown back with him to Valencia for a birthday meal with his fucking parents, I asked him if he was seeing someone. He admitted he was, claiming he wasn't in a relationship though. I was shocked and I fawned. I said it was okay, and oh my God, I actually asked for feedback on my character. Cute little monkey covering her face in shame emoji. Oh, Mandy, it's okay. We understand, okay? I asked for feedback on my character and how he managed to move on so quickly and whether I had done anything to turn him off. His reply was detached. Surprise, surprise. This is his reply verbatim. Honestly, I'm not the best person to ask. I'm just getting into dating after coming out of a 12-year relationship. I'm not sure if I could exactly classify what I'm doing as moving on. I'm just continuing to see what it's like being single and realistically being quite emotionally unavailable. I'm no expert here with the annoying little like smiling, sweating, nervous emoji, I think. Okay, last sentence and then we'll discuss because Ken is if steam could come out of Ken's ears, I think it actually might be.
You're not
His
wrong.
relationship with his relationship with his ex had officially ended a year ago at this point, and this comment made me feel like I hadn't even existed.
Oh,
Ken, tell us what you're thinking before your head pops off.
fuck me dead. I mean, not literally, but just like, oh my God. Okay. Okay. Well, this happens to be one of the worst cases of avoidant shit fuckery that I've heard in a while. I mean, I feel like I feel like if I were Mandy, I have been a spliff of weed that got used, consumed, and thrown away in replacement of a new one, meaning that I feel like this journey has been a case of feeling like I was a substance being used by an addict, and the addict absolutely loves their substance, but once they've taken their hit, they've gone on to a new one. And I know that's a simplification of a complex relationship, and I realize there's more to it than that. But I really think there's a dimension of hyper arousal and addiction, followed by, you know, abusing the substance, only to then, trade it in for the next thing that came along as well too. Now, that's one lens to look at it. Um, I think whilst his behavior is textbook severe avoidant of moving on to a new partner and he hides it, there's also an element of banishment and exiling that happens for Mandy as well too. Very reminiscent of what she went through in her childhood. If we think about it, she has been kicked out by a male figure she trusted for a new woman. She's also had an experience where that guy who, in an ideal relationship should actually protect her and validate her. She got back a message asking for clarity on her character, which we know came from a place of fawning, but I'm not here to judge that. I'm not here to pathologize it. I'm just here to say, okay, we accept that happened. And she got back what could arguably be described as the most evasive, unhelpful, and also self-absorbed message. She was asking for feedback, and instead she got a succinct summary of where his head and heart was at in terms of, you know, where he wants what he wants to do. It's so evasive. It's just, oh, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm just coming out of a, 12-year relationship, so I'm just trying to go with the flow. I don't want to think about anything too serious right now. It's like, bro, you have mishandled and botched the significance of this relationship, period. You have done significant emotional damage on such a scale that it's insane. And yes, we can acknowledge that Mandy was involved in this relationship too, that there were certain choices that were made as well. But I'm not here to judge Mandy's character because I don't think that's appropriate. I am here to just say she didn't deserve this. This is so re-traumatizing and so deeply, deeply painful. I am so sorry that you went through this, Mandy. What, as I said, a see you next Tuesday, Ralph has been.
Ralph sucks.
Big time.
Okay?
Big
I
time.
mean, you know, it's so irresponsible. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but he is operating like a child, like a 10-year-old in a toy store. Maybe not even a 10-year-old, maybe a 5-year-old in a toy store who wants to pick up all of these toys, play with them, and then just throw them on the ground when he's done, and then kick them and not even think about them again, and then be really mad that he can't reach another toy, and then go back to the other toy. It's reckless. It's not grounded. It's chaos. Um, the part that is most offensive to me is actually not even the discarding behavior, although I think that that's awful. But truly, and you guys have probably heard Ken and I talk about this a lot. I mean, obviously, I think the discarder has a lot more to be ashamed about than the discardee. And I also just I hate those terms, but I know that they're useful for sake of brevity and for describing a dynamic that people can understand and identify with.
Same.
But the thing that upsets me the most is the audacity for him to try so hard to convince you in the same breath that he is breaking up with you so callously and cruelly to not block him, to stay in his life and sort of gaslight you and cheer you up and say, "Isn't this freaking wonderful that we broke up? Oh, look at you, you're thriving. This is amazing. By the way, don't block me. Answer all of my text messages and basically be there for me. Be my secure attachment figure, but like without anything else. Like just do all of it. Be my emotional security blanket, but also don't you dare expect anything from me. And also, I'm going to be dating other people." That's insane. That the fact that he is the age he is and actually thinks that this is an acceptable way to behave in in a romantic relationship just screams insecure attachment, maybe some developmental issues. This is not normal behavior. I don't even think like a securely attached sixth grader would behave this way. It's awful. And I do. I think that he really wants you, Mandy, or he wanted you to just be his secure attachment figure, to be sort of a version of his mom that he didn't really have to be afraid of because he knew that you would sort of just be there for him and he can just go continue to travel and gallivant and date other people, all the while having the security that you're always going to be there for him. And I must say, again, this is a very fearful avoidant pattern that I have witnessed where fearful avoidants often don't want to fully take their hands off of their exes or off of other romantic prospects because having people on the back burner or having other people that can give you emotional security brings you a lot of comfort, even though you're going to continue to date other people. And in fact, if you lost that security blanket of that other person, then you wouldn't even be interested in the person, in the new person that you're dating. Because the only thing that makes the intimacy that you're receiving with the new person tolerable is the fact that you have this backup person. And it's really unfair. It's awful. And I had another note here. What did I want to say? Yeah, it's really selfish and extremely manipulative. Oh, and like Ken was saying, it makes so much sense. Mandy, I hope that you feel no shame about fawning and about asking him for that feedback. That's what you were doing. You were fawning. And guess what? That urge and that automatic response to fawn instead of fight or flight is something that your nervous system was taught when you were younger. And it makes so much sense knowing what we know about your history and how Ken was describing that you had endured some really unfair, painful treatment from your father. Um, it makes sense why you would want to be told, hey, what did I do wrong? Like, tell me how I'm good or tell me how I'm bad so that I can stay safe. It makes a whole lot of sense. And I hope that you give yourself so much compassion and love.
Completely agree with everything you said. I have nothing to add for the time being, other than to say I completely agree. And I also think too, just to round out my piece before we round out this reading, is to say I think that this is a really great, example of where it's very dangerous to allow ourselves, and this is something you learn over time through healing, to be with someone who is very ungrounded, particularly when it comes to their relationships. Like a lot of the real red flags were not only in your past interactions with Ralph when you were doing your trip in China, when you were teaching English abroad, but they were also in that reunion where you had caught up with him and he disappeared, claiming that, oh, there was just too much fire. I needed to miss, I just didn't want to upset my girlfriend. That's been an excuse throughout this entire fucking relationship, even when you got back together. And there was also the red flags, like I said, in the intensity of all that intense, chemistry when you were reuniting. On paper, yes, it's good to get stuff out like that. Like, if you reunite with an ex, sometimes that can be deeply healing. But the manner in which it became this fusion of fantasy and love and all this other stuff was when, when things started to go into a very dysregulated direction, I think, for both of you. And I think he has largely engineered much of this to soothe himself and I think what he was looking for, as Amy correctly pointed out, is he wanted a mum and to just not have to face any of his demons. But that's not how a real relationship works. The closer you get with someone, those demons are going to come out. So yeah, that's my take on this before we continue.
Yeah, I agree with your analysis, Ken. It's so this is a really heavy and layered one, you guys. This is what we were saying from the start. Okay, let's just
One
continue on and
one
then we'll
quick thing I
begin
just
to.
want to I was going to say, sorry, Amy, for interrupting. I was going to say one quick thing too, but very different from the last letter we read.
Oh, yes. Yes. And honestly, that's why I love this work so much and reading these letters and having these conversations because isn't it amazing that we can we can talk about things through this attachment lens, and at the same time, there are just multiple millions of universes of experiences and scenarios and combinations of traits and experiences that make up. I mean, we are all so individual and we have such different experiences. And while there's so many things we can relate to with each other, there are also so many differences that really do make things make it a good thing to just look at things through a lens and pick out the nuance. And it's so endlessly interesting.
Completely agreed. So, why don't we round out this letter and we can also get to Mandy's questions.
Yeah, let's go. A few days later, I had a meltdown on WhatsApp. He was at a festival in the US, but came online immediately. I expressed disappointment and asked how he'd moved on so fast. He gave me excuses, totally denied calling me unattractive and giving him the ick. He said, I didn't say that. A more accurate description would just be when I realized you have a different view of relationships to me. It made me view you and our interactions differently. He kept saying I wasn't alone and he would always be there for me. He said he was just dating an old friend. This made me want to throw up and wasn't ready for a relationship, asserting that he had no need for one and saw no benefit in a traditional monogamous setup. He said his last relationship was a charade that lasted 12 years. He said he's an incredibly happy person and doesn't need others to make him happy, yet he seems incapable of ever being alone. I stopped replying. Good on you, Mandy.
Agreed.
Right? Over the coming weeks, I pieced together from his story highlights that he'd taken the same woman on vacation just
Oh, I
weeks
figured out how to
after.
pronounce that. Sorry, I figured out. I wanted to interrupt. I found out how to pronounce that. It's seashells.
Yes, okay, that sounds right. Seashells. Okay.
It's in Africa,
Okay.
by the way, and it looks stunning.
Thank you, Ken. Yay. Okay.
Sorry for
Seashells.
that
Okay.
random interruption, but I thought I'd get it right
Oh,
for
I'm so
respect.
happy because you know me well enough to know that that would have been circling in my brain. And even though I could have easily Googled it, I probably wouldn't have. And I would have just left it as an open tab that would have tortured me. So thank you. Okay. Over the coming weeks, I pieced together from his story highlights that he had taken the same woman to the Seychelles just weeks after our breakup and when he was pestering me to speak while I was in no contact. And later on, he took her to the wedding I was invited to in Africa. And then I think he met her in London the night before he came to mine. His two story highlights from that night showed him clearly being out with someone who was off camera but could be heard and their voice was female. He continued immediately watching my stories whenever I posted, and it was giving me anxiety. Oh, God, social media. We could do a whole series on the intricacies of social media and this dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
In mid, right? We should. In mid-October, I sent him calm voice notes explaining that I cared about him but was disappointed in his behavior. I no longer had respect for him and I needed to protect myself. I
Good on
told him
you.
yes, we are clapping for you. I told him he needed to acknowledge the hurt he'd caused me and take accountability, and suggested if shame was blocking him, that might be something to unpack. You are darn correct. I also stated I was certain he met up with this woman behind my back in London in June, and I know he took her to the Seychelles just 3 weeks after our breakup. I reminded him of how I'd always got on with his mum and how we used to chat, noting that he tended to catastrophize her reactions, which I said I understood, but the chances are she barely remembers me and wouldn't have cared about seeing me. I ended up by saying I hoped he was happy and didn't need to hurt others to find his own happiness, and then I blocked him. WhatsApp shows he listened when he woke the next day. It seems to show this now, even if you block people. Since then, it's been silence. It's been over a month since blocking him everywhere so that I can heal, and I still have moments of spiraling and self-doubt. I realized he wasn't ready for a relationship and I ended up being the anchor for someone unprepared, which re-traumatized me. I'm now in therapy, journaling, and exploring tools like hypnosis. I'm so deeply sad because of our long history. It feels much deeper than just a 6 month fling that didn't work out. I have so many old memories tied to him, and I feel awful about his past. It also really messed with my self-image. I felt like a gargoyle when he said he wasn't attracted to me, and then he went and replaced me with someone who looks a bit plastic. It feels like he rushed into someone else to erase me. I don't know if it was just image management after telling everyone about me, or to numb any bad feelings, or just liberated me from all of the above. With the new woman, I suspect alcohol is a large part of their dynamic, as it's always at the forefront of the stories he posts. I barely drink, so we mostly just drink sparkling water when together. Something to note, he told me he was going to meet his ex the day after we had our closure chat. The same day, she also made it very clear through her Instagram account that she was openly dating her friend. I imagine she let Ralph know she had fully moved on when they met. So I'm going to
Wow.
read all of the questions and then we can go back and answer them.
Go for it.
Mandy's questions are, despite admitting he didn't respect his ex, he was still hurt from the breakup, wasn't he? He hadn't processed it. I have moments where I feel I didn't matter at all and he is still in love with her. And then at other times, I feel like he didn't care and panicked, feeling engulfed and pushed me away. Am I being delusional? Did my sulking in April turn him off, or was there more going on? Do you think his catastrophizing about his mom was a way to create a barrier with me, to make it a reason why we couldn't even be together in his head and create distance? I do feel he lined this new person up before leaving. I imagine he is love bombing her while telling her he doesn't want a relationship, thinking that's okay. But I just keep thinking, why did he need to have someone lined up if he's so happy on his own? I keep torturing myself by thinking about this person he's with. I keep torturing myself thinking this person he's with won't trigger him and that he'll end up committing to her. Do you think he will ever reach out again?
I'm taking a big breath because there's so much here, Mandy, that you've shared. Firstly, I wanted to say again, I'm so sorry you've gone through this experience. This is devastating. I mean, you know, you say it was a 6 month fling. I felt like it was a 60-year experience because with all the travel and the intensity of what was going on, I felt like there was so much happening in each and every location, and it was framed with so much history and love and distancing and all this stuff from Ralph, where it just made things so, so painful and difficult. So, just to give you my 2 cents on in regards to some of the things you've shared at the end before I dive straight into answering your questions, I want to just commend you for doing what you did of blocking him after communicating that it wasn't helpful or healthy to have ongoing communication with him. I think that with regards to the self-image issue that you're now experiencing, feeling like a gargoyle when he said he wasn't attracted to you and replacing you with someone who looks a bit plastic, I think this is his coping mechanism for navigating this. And it's very common for a lot of fearful avoidance on the severe end to do this. To look, this is very consistent with his behavior. Instead of dealing with grief, he finds ways to medicate it, including through relationships. He's also found someone, as you describe, who's a bit plastic. I've said, I'm not going to use the words I've used, but let's just say I have found that a lot of people like this will find what I call a blank canvas that they can move on to. And they often take a lot of their excess emotional baggage from the previous relationship and dump it onto the new one. The fact that drinking is involved suggests to me that this relationship is probably not that deep, and he uses the drinking to get through it. Probably similar to how he self-medicated through travel to navigate his relationship with his ex-girlfriend of 12 years. If he does commit to this girl, it's probably because it doesn't bring out the same level of homeostasis that, came out in his relationship with you. He mentioned that this 6 month relationship with you had more depth than a 12-year relationship with his ex-wife. This leads me to answering one of your questions. You know, you ask about how, you know, he hadn't really moved on from his ex. He was still hurt from the breakup with her. I think there was a dimension of hurt that he hadn't processed. I think to me, I think that there was probably a bit of, you know, a sense of obligation to her and also a sense of resentment for the way he'd been treated. But do I think that you were just the rebound, so to speak? If you feel like a rebound, that's totally valid and fair given the circumstances. But I don't think that mitigates the history and the intensity of his relationship he's had with you. I truly do believe there has been a connection that's been ongoing. I've worked with avoidant clients like this. They are crying every morning and evening thinking about an ex. So believe me when I tell you, the feelings are genuinely there, even when they're in a new relationship. And this was going on in one person I knew for like 5+ years. Like it happens. So I don't doubt the feelings. But what I think is true based on this is I think that when it comes to his relationship with his ex, I think that he hadn't processed it, no. And I don't think it was a case of, oh, he loved his ex more than you, and therefore, you know, he didn't love you. He was just using you to self-medicate. I think multiple things were going on. I think there was a deep connection that was unsettling for him. I think he used a lot of his ex's unprocessed stuff to create distance and chaos to try and manage the uncomfortability he was feeling, but I don't think it was necessarily a case that he loved her more than you, based on what I'm reading here. That's my interpretation on that. I could be wrong, but that's what I get, and I don't think you're being Sorry, sorry, English. I feel like he did care and panicked, feeling engulfed and pushed me away. Am I being delusional? No, because this is very textbook avoidance stuff, as we've said throughout the letter. Did your sulking in April turn him off? No. Was there more going on? Yes. I think the sulking was probably maybe something where he just didn't want to feel like he had to respond to you emotionally. I think the deeper issue is the growing connection, which had been an ongoing theme even way back when you became single. So to me, I think the sulking was more of a I think that was a bit of a red herring, to be honest. I think, you were understandably just maybe feeling pretty crappy about the way things were. I don't think that was the real issue. I think that he was the issue. Um, do you think his catastrophizing about his mum was a way to create a barrier between you? Yes. To make it a reason why we couldn't ever be together in his head and create distance. Abso-fucking-lutely. And that was an ongoing pattern that we identified throughout a lot of this. Blah, blah, blah. Why did he need to have someone lined up if he's so happy being on his own? Because he's not happy being on his own. He was happier to create distance from you because that's what felt like the optimal space in order to self-regulate. It does not mean he's a happy person on his own by any stretch of the imagination. Like we said, when he went from weed addiction to workaholism, now it's alcoholism with the new chick, with the girl who's plastic. He just goes from one thing to another to manage shame. And do I think he'll reach out again? Possibly. I'm not saying no, but knowing his pattern of reaching out, my answer is absolutely it's a likelihood. That's the best way I've done to try and summarize my answers on this.
Mhm. Wow, so good, Ken. Okay, I'll try to go through the questions succinctly. Was he still hurt from his ex? Did he love her? Did I matter? Yes, I do think he was still hurt, but not because he was so in love with her and because it was an amazing relationship. I think he was hurt because she was his primary attachment figure for 12 years and she provided stability and identity, which is something that he clearly really, really needs. Um, and he never processed the ending. He didn't have time. And I think he, you had left him, Mandy, way back when, and then his ex left him. And I think maybe his shame felt very triggered when he gets left. Um, I think he does care about you a lot. And I think he also doesn't have the stability and emotional maturity and regulation to be able to recognize love for what it is and to be able to contain it and hold it. Um, I don't think that he left because you don't matter. He left because he cannot handle closeness. He cannot even handle stillness, which is so interesting and very, very, you really just see the blend of fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant traits in him. Did your sulking turn him off? No. I think his attachment system was already bulking, and your emotional needs just um, activated that fear of closeness and that fear of attunement. He didn't want to have to look at you and say, "Hey, what's going on? Let's talk, let's connect, let's repair." He does not have the ability or the capacity to do that. And then, of course, your sulking could have become like a convenient narrative for him to, throw at you later, but it definitely did not cause anything. Um, did he use catastrophizing about his mom as a barrier? Abso-freaking-lutely. Um, it is a very common avoidant tendency to use external things to, like our job, my family, my job, my lifestyle, logistics, timing to justify distance, while not taking any responsibility for any personal failure or personal attachment failure, or for even just saying, "Hey, I don't have the capacity." It's a very avoidant thing to blame on other things, but maintain their sort of reputation or their view of themselves. Um, did he line up a new person in advance? Yes. Um, avoidance, like I was saying before, especially fearful avoidance, rarely leave without a soft landing. And that means having multiple people on the back burner. Why? Because then you never have to experience silence and stillness and yourself and the mirror that you try so hard to avoid and the shame that is right beneath the surface. And you have to numb it out and you have to drown it out and you have to get validation from somebody else. And this is something that fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance do. And honestly, anxious preoccupied people can do this also. This is just a very, in general, insecurely attached thing. It protects them from shame, loneliness, emotional responsibility, grief. He's very obviously not stable enough to be alone. He does not have enough internal resources or internal sense of safety to just be with himself, hence the traveling. Will the new woman trigger him less? Will he commit? Here's the thing. She will definitely trigger him if she's a human.
Yeah,
If
but she
she's
doesn't
a
sound like a
fully
human.
grown human, right. If she's a fully grown human with needs, feelings, or expectations, she's going to trigger him. Or she could either be super duper avoidant and not feel comfortable communicating any of her needs and also be afraid of closeness, in which case that might work temporarily, but then also there's not going to be any like juiciness or passion there, and that's why like you rarely see two dismissive avoidance together. Or she will suppress her needs so much and then explode. And that's also not going to be pretty. Um, so yeah, the thing is, people what Ralph is what he has been expressing in his behaviors and in his communication is not because of you, it is because of him. These are his patterns, and patterns do not just magically change overnight. They do not magically change with a new partner. A new partner, depending upon their attachment style, can certainly push or not push on certain buttons, but his core fears and triggers will always be there regardless of who he is with. And so these patterns, I think, are really going to prevent him from having any deep, long-lasting, truly intimate, committed relationship with her or with anybody else. Um, will he reach out again? I think he will absolutely reach out again. I'm not saying he definitely will, but I think the likelihood that he will reach out is much higher than he won't, and that's because I think he is a little bit more fearful avoidant. Um, I think he will get bored or triggered by his new bond. He obviously feels a great sense of emotional safety with you, and he tries to keep you there, even though he can't give you anything that you actually need. And I think that he will reach out when he feels shameful or scared or emotionally unstable or when he gets a big life stressor. But I think when he comes back, it will be equally, if not more, unhealthy. And you really need to have such strong boundaries. And I would really suggest not even engaging at all. Whew. Those are my 2 cents.
Your 2 cents is consistent with my 2 cents, and now we've got 4 cents of wisdom, which is to say, I think that yeah, look, Mandy, when I hear a lot of this, I think you sound like you're understandably in the early stages of recovery with this, which is always the worst. But you have every right to take the time you need to heal this. Going through a breakup like yours is slightly different in that you've had a multi-year relationship with this guy spanning over 20 years. Even though you may not have been in contact for all of those 20 years, you've had significant chapters and moments. And like I said, when we started, being told, I've obsessed over you for 20 years, I wasn't able to meet you then because I had some unresolved stuff from my past. That is enough to get anyone feeling like, great, I've a person from my past has come back. Do you know how many stories are written online of people who talk about, I always knew that there was that one guy where it never worked out, but he found a way to come back in my life and we're now happily ever after and he's my soulmate. Like, there's plenty of those stories out there. Now, I don't know the legitimacy of those stories and how happily ever after goes for them. That's neither here nor there. The point is, it's not uncommon for unresolved partners to resurface and to air the laundry out, and very it becomes very interesting to see the direction of where it may go. But I think this has been ultimately, on one hand, elevating and deeply traumatic on so many levels as well, too. So yeah, I'll round up my stuff here by saying, Mandy, thank you for sharing this with us and giving us the chance to read this and just to go through the breadth of this experience, because even though it was 6 months, it honestly, oh God, it felt like, with the amount of intensity that was there with every location from Valencia to Seychelles to London to Africa to wherever you were, it was huge stuff going on.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a case where the fact that it was an actual physical 6 months does not matter because there are years and so much emotional energy. The actual history of having known him for 20 years and the fact that you know, to be chosen is such a human need. And I don't care how securely attached you are. In fact, I think it's a very securely attached thing to admit that you want to be chosen. And in fact, to demand that you are chosen in your relationship. Otherwise, you are not going to be in that relationship or invest in that relationship. And Mandy, given your early life experiences of losing your mom and then having your dad behave the way he did, I can only imagine how it must have felt for you to hear Ralph say those words of, I've been thinking about you for 20 years. You're the one that I want. You're the one I want to be with. You're healing me. You're the love of my life. To be chosen by an attachment figure when you have previously been not chosen or made to feel unchosen is feels like the only thing you could ever want. It feels so amazing. And then to have that sort of ripped away in such a cruel, callous manner, and then have him not even have the dignity or integrity to leave your life after saying that he didn't want to be in it, but to insist that you stay in his life as some sort of security blanket is just so hurtful and so absurd on his behalf, so emotionally immature to put it lightly. And so, you know, there's no shame in wanting to be chosen. There's no shame in feeling pain after a situation like this. And I just wish you so much healing. And I hope that you understand that you did not do anything to deserve being discarded or left or not chosen. This is this is a him thing. This is not a you thing. And by the way, it is so obvious, and I don't know what work you've done, but it really feels like you have done a lot of beautiful work with yourself, and there's so much secure attachment and so much beautiful backing yourself up and taking care of yourself. And I really hope that you're able to continue to do that because you deserve so much love, both from yourself and from a healthy partner who has the capacity and maturity to really be with you.
Completely agree with everything you said, Amy. So just rounding out, thank you very much again for submitting this to us. And I hope that this is able to give you a measure of clarity and comfort off the back of what you've been through. And to anyone who's listening, this is our 111th episode where there'll be 112th that's being aired very soon as well, and that'll be it for the year. And then as we move into 2026, I'm going to see how I feel about, reorganizing the Ken Reads podcast experience because I know a lot of people get value out of it, like I said at the beginning. But thank you, as always, for those of you that have submitted. Thank you to those that are interested in submitting.
And we'll be back for one more episode before we round out for the year. So, apart from that, thank you, and we will see you guys next time. Bye for now.